Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 621. Feather of the Beast. Feather of the Beast. Relic. Durability, 1500. 1 plus 70% Earth Affinity. 2 plus 150% to the effect of all Earth attribute magic. 3 plus 45% additional curse damage to Earth attribute skills. 4 plus 15% health regeneration when standing on firm ground. 5 plus 75% power to all spells. 6 plus 125% mana regeneration. 7 plus 45% chant reduction. 8 passive skill, Prospector. A diamond in the rough made by the hands of craftsman Smith and blessed by a primordial existence pleased with the purity had been refined by Master Alzalsar's enchantments. Once rumors of the ring's power spread or it plays a role in the user's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Alzalsar's skills were nothing to scoff at. The power of the ring had multiplied compared to its previous state and it had gained several more functions that improved its benefit to a mage, especially those of the earth attribute. Seth was intrigued by the prospector skill that could strengthen one's earth spells based on the ground below their feet. When he asked the sorceress how she did it, she explained that she had linked it to the blessing of Behemoth that improved health regeneration when standing firmly on solid ground. He looked forward to how much more powerful it could become if he found the fitting soul and enchantment for the soul. He was quite happy with the ring, and it didn't seem like Al was in the mood to entertain his curiosity much longer. The blacksmith grabbed what was left of his chain breaker items and scampered back to Mina's march. With these potential legendary items in his bag, he would have to rearrange his plans a little depending on who he would give these to. A sword, a helmet, and a dagger. On the way back, the blacksmith deliberated who to give these to, but after thinking for some time, he found that there was no perfect answer. The final powers of these items were too much of a mystery. This was why he let his gut decide. Although Mike was the sword demon, he decided to give the angel sword to Jonah, the vampiric swordsman. The overall aesthetic of the sword, its mystical power, and the potential it had just fit a lot better to him. In the end, he was not only giving them items to strengthen them, but also to make them more attractive to gods. A streamlined image was important. Unlike the sword, Seth had even less of an idea of what the dagger and the helmet were capable of. Since Mina had already told him that she wouldn't switch weapons, the choice for the dagger was quite clear: Lydia. If she ended up not liking the dagger, he would make her another one anyway. Lastly, the helmet. Seth could make an educated guess that it would probably come with some types of resistance and probably effects that would support a caster, which was why he decided to give this one to Bulko. Powerful resistances, especially against mind effects, would have a powerful effect on the whole party thanks to Bulko's class as a mirror cleric that could share his own stats with others. With this, he could technically tick off 3 people on his list of people that needed a legendary item. 4 including Monique. The only question left was whether he would get proficiency for the items. Once they were recognized by the system, he didn't expect it, but if it happened it would be a nice surprise. However, he didn't bet on it. Seth had slightly adjusted his plans since he finished Tatzel's sacrifice. After his initial shock over the amount of proficiency needed died down, a preposterous idea blossomed in the blacksmith's mind. Who said legendary items couldn't be mass-produced? If he made some concessions and streamlined some processes. Others may call him crazy, but Seth liked to think of himself as efficient. He decided to optimize his workflow by standardizing the items, similar to how he did it with the oath armors and accessories, although to a lesser degree. The casters like Lixis, Allison, Jess, Ellie, Evan, Ray, or Shay had only asked for accessories without closer specifications. They wouldn't each need individual forging ballads, which allows Seth to make the same base for all of their items. He decided on his tried and true method to make ring blanks. Making the same base ring for all of them would cut the production time by a lot, while it wouldn't really lower the quality of the final result, since he would customize the rings using the enchantments and souls. He was just thinking of this, when he noticed that his step had brought him to the city center, instead of the system church. He was close to Mina's Mars surface office but decided to pay a visit to the turquoise anvil. Upon entering the store he found it rather empty. The usually filled shelves and racks were almost devoid of merchandise. Had someone gone on a shopping spree? "Hello, Tower Master. What brought you here so early in the morning?" the clerk asked with her well-trained smile. "I was just close by and thought of visiting. Did some big spender suddenly appear, or why is the shop almost empty?" "Ah, yes. The Great Neljiv Guild was here last week and bought a lot on credit. Seth had been quite happy, hearing that someone had bought so much, however his face fell when he heard the last words. Credit? He asked very seriously. Yes. It was great. Especially their guild master is so dashing. But we don't give credit. Items are to be paid up front. Seth said coldly, ignoring the clerk's swooning. The boss made an accept. Seth squinted and suddenly shoved the raw egg on the clerk's head. T-Tower Master? What are you doing? You sold items on credit. Of course no we did, why did we? I'm sorry Master, I have no idea what happened, the clerk suddenly pleaded in panic. The clerk may have been clueless, but Seth was quite clear about what had happened. Someone had used mind tricks to swindle items from them. By putting his helmet on the clerk's head, the item's effect had gotten rid of the manipulation, since it gave 100% immunity to mind effects. He was more concerned about Jane. If it also happened to Jane, who wore soul armaments, it had to be a very powerful magic or skill. Where is Jane? She tending to our guests, from the Neljev Guild in the restaurant. Ill-humored, Seth ascended the stairs with heavy stomps. He really had enough work and now he was forced to deal with something like this. At least the culprits were present and didn't force him to search them all around the city. He found the restaurant empty, while Jane was personally serving 8 to 10 rowdy guests at a central table. Jane! What are you doing and why is the restaurant empty? Oh, Seth! I'm serving our guests of honor. They have rented the whole restaurant for the day. This small exchange was more than enough for Seth to see, that Jane was also under some spell. To even be able to manipulate Jane, he could only suspect the perpetrator to be a chosen. He doubted any normal skill could permanently enchant her, despite wearing soul armaments. Hey, who are you to disturb us? Are you her boyfriend? One of the drunks asked, suddenly putting an arm around Jane's shoulder. His face was red from alcohol. Hee, sorry but she's with us now. I hope you don't mind if we have some fun with her later. The rest of the table laughed. Seth watched his grubby hand move, to grope Jane's chest. The table suddenly fell silent. Together with a cut-off hand, the mood hit rock bottom. Seth! Jane cried out, as the guy squealed like a pig, holding the stump of his arm. Who allowed you to touch my things? I'm not her boyfriend, I am her employer. The rest of the table didn't listen to him. In their drunken stupor, they belatedly jumped up. They unsheathed their weapons and donned their armor, of which many were made by Seth himself. I am also the owner of this place and I heard some disturbing things. Stuff like buying on credit and renting the whole place. Can you even imagine my displeasure? They jumped at him, but he had already grabbed Jane and changed places using the star escape. Although Seth was speaking calmly, he was boiling inside after seeing that someone had used a kind of charm on his people. However, after the initial cut, he put the ravenous sog back in his inventory. The real perpetrator was not among them, so he didn't intend to cripple them any more than already done. Seeing their weapons, he was assured his fists were more than enough to teach them a lesson. Chapter 622. Disarm. Disarm. Suddenly the weapons they had just unsheathed and parts of the armor they had donned jumped out of their hands and off their bodies. It was one of the effects of crafty failsafe Leave 7. Not only could items he made not be used against him, he could even outright disarm the opponent. Using their surprise, Seth charged in and started wildly beating them. He simply ignored their counterattacks, as nothing they could do had a chance to penetrate his legendary defense. The blacksmith had no brawler skills but had overbearing strength and every strike was imbued with the plague curse of Lisith. Since they could do nothing against the blacksmith's slaughter, it was like an adult fighting a group of toddlers. As if he was in the smithy, striking metal, he made sure to pound the curses of disease in their flesh and bones. Just because he didn't intend to kill, didn't mean he would grant them an enjoyable life. The first had already lost his hand forever since Seth had used the ravenous sog to cut it, which also severed the soul. The curses on the other hand would need high-level healing magic to be cleansed. His anger was real, but he went even further than necessary because he knew he had to make an example out of them. It wouldn't stop with just them. If he didn't do the same with the true perpetrator, other champions may think Minasmar was easy to bully. Seth, what have you done? Jane exclaimed hysterically when he finally stopped beating the people on the ground. As an answer, he simply shoved the raw egg on Jane's head. After staring blankly into the distance for a few seconds, she suddenly seemed to come to it. These. Suddenly Jane stormed at the heap of half-dead bodies and started stomping them, while cursing them out like a sailor. "Don't kill them, we need them alive." "Why? Do you think I have the time to run around town and look for their guild master? They are bait. And put them in a stable side position, we don't want them to choke on their own vomit, right?" It was part of the curse of plague and disease. Their bodies were weakened, going back and forth between high fever and chills. Nausea, headaches, pain, diarrhea, the curse came with the full plethora of everything that would make feel people miserable. The next step was that Seth sent an anonymous email to the Neljev Guild with pictures of their badly beaten guild members. Of course, he was just a terrified witness in this scenario, telling them that someone had suddenly stormed into the restaurant and beaten up their guild members. Seth even used channeling for some demonic help in writing the mail, so the guild master would appear in person to ask for an explanation. If he didn't, Seth would simply collect all of his guild members until the whole guild used the floor as their sickbed. He also sent a message to Mary to let her know what he was about to do. After all, they were still living in a society. He needed a good cover-up if he went around beating people near death. After waiting for an hour, getting more annoyed about the time he was losing, he suddenly got a call from Mary. "He's here." The guild master and the executive members of the Neljev Guild had actually directly shown up at Mar's offices. "Make them wait. Don't meet them directly. I'm there in a moment." For a short moment, people could see a shadow streak through the city canyons of Delta, as Seth used Star Escape and 3D maneuver assistance to fast travel through the city. During his training he found that the constellation map of Scorpio always formed a plane with the soles of his boots, meaning that its orientation would change with the orientation of his body. With his improved agility and assistance skills, he was able to use the short-distance teleportation to travel between footholds on buildings or use the facades themselves as footholds. It didn't even take the blacksmith 5 minutes to cross the distance between the turquoise anvil and their office building. The only problem with this way of traveling was that it was not to Seth's taste. He was no adrenaline junkie or anything like that, so he had been stricken with fear when he first started using it. At this point, he had managed to reduce it to just being stressed. "Where is he?" Standing at the entrance he wrote a message to Mary and got the number of a room as an answer. It was a meeting room on the second floor. "What are you going to do?" the message came a little later as if she hesitated to ask. Seth didn't write back. There was no need to create explicit evidence. He adjusted the skyrobe a little before entering the meeting room. "Hey, isn't Mar a little too much? At first, we are not greeted in person and we aren't even offered anything to drink when we are made to wait." A complaint came flying at him the moment he came through the door. Ignoring the voice, Seth scanned the room. There were about a dozen people. At the head of the table sat an objectively handsome man. The slimy smile on his face really ruined his impression. It was a face that made his fist itch. "Well, gentlemen, you are asking for treatment appropriate for guests. I am happy to inform you that you are not guests." Seth's bluntness stunned the seated guild members. "You are petty little thieves who dared to use charm magic on my people." They had already taken their breath to deny it and cry out in anger when the room was filled with groans. They were about to jump off their seats when a terrible pressure forced the knees to give in and sit back down. Dragon might, it was different from the skill it was with the wyvern set. Now it was an ability, infinitely closer to that of a real dragon. The blacksmith could use it freely, concentrate it and change the area of effect. The whole room was filled with an aura that made it hard to breathe. Only the guild master of the Neljev Guild was able to hide the effects it had on him and spoke up. "Tower Master, I don't know what you are talking about," he managed to utter with some pauses. "Please calm your anger. We came here to ask for an explanation as some of our guild members were beaten up in your establishment." Seth could feel the power in his words and the charm of his voice. He also saw some illusion effect that tried to make his face more handsome and lovely. His heart was set aflame. These pitiful tricks only acted as fuel for the fire of rage in the blacksmith's heart. It was similar to the voice of Seth, but it was simply crude. Where the voice of Seth was a power of persuasion that aimed to find and nurture the desires in someone else to come to a satisfactory result, this guy simply forced his will on others. Seth questioned what kind of god would hand out such skills. Even if he didn't have Laraeg, Seth was confident that he would be largely unaffected thanks to his high willpower attribute and the Eye of Argus. It was less the danger it posed to him than the pure audacity to try and use this shit on him. "Don't worry. You will join them." One had to admit that the guild master was not stupid. At the crack of Seth's knuckles, he understood who had sent the message and that his tricks didn't work. He jumped up, the chair he sat on flying back. In one smooth movement, he unsheathed a sword from his inventory and donned an armor. Disarm. At the same time as the ability of crafty failsafe was activated and the armor and weapon flew away from him, Seth ported behind the man. As if he had announced what he was going to do, he amputated the man's right arm at the shoulder with an upward swing of the ravenous sog. A system notification played over the squeals of the now one-armed man. Ding! Your weapon has learned a new skill. Chapter 623. Compensation. Seth ignored the whines of the man crawling on the ground and the shocked looks of the other scum in the room while checking his weapon. A 12th effect had been added to the blade. The curse of obedience, which had a low chance of temporarily forcing someone to follow the wielder's orders. It was a shame this ability was placed on a weapon that would either kill or cripple a target on hit. When he looked back up from the sword, he found that the man on the ground was actually drinking a high-grade potion from their shop. Seth was displeased at the waste of one of their potion, because as the guild master soon found out, the potion could not help reattach his arm. No matter how much he pressed his severed arm to his shoulder, it did not heal back on. Instead, the shoulder healed up as a clean stump, as if he never had an arm. This was the effect of the ravenous sog devouring that part of the soul. Seth felt no pity for the man. This was what it meant to make an example out of someone. He lifted the chair that had been kicked away back up and sat down at the head of the table. What was this situation? The members of the Neljev Guild were paralyzed and looked at the Tower Master in shock, while their guild master was still whimpering on the ground somewhere beside that man's chair. The man who was blessed by the dark goddess of beauty Neljavara, the man who was handed the guild master position without opposition, who had always gotten what he wanted since gaining the blessing, had been completely crushed. Well then, gentlemen. Let's start by putting everything on the table. What? What was this scary man talking about? What did he want? They were too confused and afraid to think straight. Compensation. We will start by you putting all the gold, money, and items in your inventories on the table. Then we will proceed to do the same with all your guild members until I have all the items you ransacked from my shop back, payment for those you already used, rent for usage, and compensation for stealing them in the first place and using nefarious skills on our guild members. They hesitated, unsure what to do, when the man lifted their guild master up, showing the cleanly healed stump where his right arm once was. That is of course unless you want to become a one-armed bandit like your friend here, he added a threat. The scene became more shocking because their guild master still desperately tried to press his dead arm against the blood-smeared stump. It wasn't just the fact that this man seemed to be able to do permanent damage in an age when healing magic was able to cure virtually everything. It was also the pure desperation of the man he held up. The guild master they knew as a callous and crafty man with too much confidence for his own good, was a broken mess. The quickest one immediately started piling up all his possessions on the table. His example spurred the others to do the same. You too. The voice of Seth helped to bring the guild master back to his senses, somewhat. The grip on his neck, which helped him up, made it clear that he did not have a choice in the matter. Like in a game, when one slayed a boss, riches kept piling up everywhere in the room. They didn't possess a lot of gold, but they had sizable amounts of silver, copper, credits, and some good materials. The most valuable items were still those they had ransacked from the turquoise anvil. When the stream of items finally stopped, a parchment with golden embossing appeared in Seth's hand. After all, letting a man with such a dangerous ability live was only reasonable because Seth had a way to disarm the danger, well further disarm him. Before anybody left the room they would sign a soul contract, and he had a special one for the guild master. On the big, ornate parchment he showed the man, was only a short paragraph. He would be unable to use his skills against any player unless he got the personal, one-time permission from Seth or a Lord of Minas March. In the end, they were living in a society. Seth couldn't just kill people with the ability to mind control others, or else he would be the bad guy. Crippling them in self-defense and forcing them to pay compensation and sign a contract was much more reasonable, probably. Seth felt a lot better after he got collecting 75 gold, several thousand silver, copper, and several millions of credits into his inventory. The power of money was truly miraculous. After cleaning the table off the things he would keep, he called some staff to collect the other items and informed Mary how their further actions. She was to take this bunch back to their guild and recollect all the items and compensation they still owed. Since all of them had signed the contract, they couldn't worm their way out of this, which was why Seth felt safe to leave it to Mary and a team of Oathguard to retrieve their possessions. Ugh, what an annoying business. Seth plopped down on his chair in the workshop. It had gotten late by the time the blacksmith could return to Minas Mar, and he felt tired, mentally. Why couldn't people be responsible with their power, like him? He didn't go around abusing voice of Seth to get stuff for free. Following this event, Seth found that it was also necessary to equip the non-combatants accordingly. Mind control abilities were maybe some of the most frightening of skills out there. He had thought that having everyone equip soul armament would be enough, but with the age of gods coming about them, he was obviously wrong. What was annoying was that this guy was not even a chosen. Seth had already guessed that there was more to the world quest than just people becoming chosen. They could also gain blessings from the gods. This dude that had cost him a whole day and a bunch of stress only had a strong blessing, he wasn't even a true chosen. It was kind of aggravating that even these small fish dared to mess with them. He was pondering on a way to make items to protect the administrative members of Minas Mar from similar future incidents. It was a shame that demons were bad when it came to protective abilities. Those were more so the domain of gods and deities. Maybe he found a special kind of soul. Sitting in his workshop and listening to Cerberus rhythmically striking the metal, he had a sudden inspiration and suddenly started to work. Not with metal and hammer, but with feather and parchment. The bard decided to write a ballad. Only a few demons had secondary protective abilities, most lacked any at all. But what all of them excelled at were usually offensive means. What was the saying? The best defense was to attack. So what if he made an item that would directly strike down whoever tried to use a charm ability on the wearer? He didn't know a specific demon for this purpose, but in theory, it didn't matter. The demon would come following the intentions of the song. However, maybe a song alone was not enough. He got stuck when he found that he was something missing. It was late when Seth appeared at the auction house. Lately, he had only been searching for materials, but today he was here for something else. He had just made some money and intended to spend some. Ever since he returned to Earth, he had not learned any new enchantments. One of the reasons was that there was no real need, the other was that enchantment scrolls were terribly expensive at the auction house. Since he didn't necessarily need them, they were not worth the price. Now, however, there was an enchantment he wished to get. It was Mind Cocoon, a specialized version of the barrier enchantment that could protect from crowd control effects and mind attacks. Seth immediately used the scroll to learn the enchantment. Despite the enchantment itself not being very strong, his mind was immediately flooded with ideas. He hurried back to his workshop to harness the wave of inspiration. Chapter 624. Hell Spells. Solemnly, the hammer struck the metal, giving the rhythm to the song. Ounce joined in with a dark demonic tune, as the blacksmith's voice rose in the workshop. I'm roaring blaze, ashen rain, I'm coming on like a hurricane. My light is burning across the sky. The flames in the forge behind licked up to the ceiling and joyous power kept building up around the blacksmith. Seth kept broadcasting his music in the ether, as he forged a small piece of legendary Olympian silver. You think you're smart, but you're gonna die. I won't take no prisoners, won't spare no lives. Nobody's putting up a fight. I got my spell, I'm gonna send you to hell. I'm gonna get ye, he's gonna get ye. Hell spells. You got me using my hell spells. The blacksmith kept envisioning his enemies going up in flames. Whoever touched him should face a horrible retribution. He wanted to imbue this power into the circlet he was currently working on. His raging melody awakened several presences at first, but many left when faced with his intentions. I'll give you black scorching up and down your spine. If you wish me evil, you're no friend of mine. See the white sparks flashing, combust, and ignite. 'Cause if you start the fight, I will show you the night. I won't take no prisoners, won't spare no lives. Nobody's putting up a fight. I got my spell, I'm gonna send you to hell. I'm gonna get ye, he's gonna get ye. Only one presence stuck with him, and it was a dark presence full of heat and violent, deceitful thoughts. Through channeling, the blacksmith got the impression of a leopard enveloped in flames, a demon he vaguely remembered, but could not recall the name of. Hell spells. Flames of a bloody dark color surrounded his hand as he worked the metal and soaked into the silver, turning it a light rose color. It kept darkening to a cherry red, and Seth kept singing and roughly finished the circlet. Ding! You have created an epic rated piece of music. Proficiency gained. 3 notifications followed, telling him his singing, journeyman, had become level 6 and his songwriting, adept, jumped from level 5 to level 7. The fact that he was so easily able to write an epic piece had to be because of the effects his armor lent him. Whether his intention worked or not, he only found out once he checked the roughly finished circlet. He felt relieved since it seemed that it had worked on the first try. In an impulse, he had directly started using legendary material. Failing would have been a tragic loss. The effects of hell spells was a tyrannic counterattack effect that would use the demon's full power to eradicate an attacker. It also came with a slight defensive option against mental attacks and curses. The circlet so far was good, but it was only a work piece without any clear descriptions. He was not finished with it. Next, he had to refine and enchant it at the jeweler's table to make it a complete item. Of course, the enchantment in question was the mind cocoon he had purchased earlier. He combined it with improved willpower, to further strengthen the wearer's mental power and mental resistance. One could never be too careful. He didn't immediately get any notifications that the item was finished, as the system seemed to know that he intended to add a soul armament. For the soul, he fused 9 big fragments of the 24th Ethnar to get one massive-sized fragment. As he already used the one Olympian enchantment he was sure could protect the mind, Seth didn't want to try his luck by using a random one. Instead, he engraved the soul with an ordinary barrier, improved intelligence, and another willpower enchantment for good measure. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. The notification sounded as he took the circlet from the waters of Styx. He was a little surprised to find the circlet a little special. Up to now, the high-grade items Seth made had been oozing with effects. Despite the circlet not being like that, Seth was pretty satisfied with the outcome. Floros Firewall. Legendary. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 Floros Firewall. 3 + 110 Willpower. 4 + 60 Intelligence. 5 Barrier. A circlet with a connection to Floros, a great Duke of Hell. It was created by the ill-humored hand of craftsman Smith with the intent to strike down anyone who touched his people. The name finally helped him to remember the name of the demon he had managed to channel. Floros was a demon of fire similar to Zaphon, but the blacksmith knew little more than that since the leopard-shaped demon was not in his focus at any time. Even though he didn't know too much, the primary effects of the circlet made it quite clear what the demon could do. As a secondary effect, Floros' firewall blocked all kinds of mental attacks and curses. The effect had fused even better with the enchantment of mental cocoon than Seth had expected, which led him to believe that the demon had a similar aspect, to begin with. The primary effects of Floros' firewall were to strike down enemies that started these kinds of attacks. Reading the effect made Seth glad that he had used a massive soul on the item because the decryption was quite terrifying. It knew no mercy. If an attack was blocked by the effect, the demon would channel as much power as possible to eradicate the enemy. The attacker's life would be the price for this intervention. This was strong, but not the terrifying part. If the attacker could not be eradicated, or the price was higher than the worth of the target's life, the difference would be paid by the wearer of the circlet in a kind of resource burn. Mana, mental energy, stamina, item durability, and finally life force in that order would be burned away until the price was paid or the item and user were destroyed. This was why Seth was glad to have used a massive soul, as the effect would have to burn through a buffer of roughly 10,000 mana first, before touching anything else. He hoped Mary or Jane would never meet anything that was so powerful, that the price to kill it would be higher than the item's mana. Aside from this absolute success of an enchantment, there were barrier, which could create a temporary barrier with the same durability as the circlet to block a physical attack, and Blessing of Wind. It was the same effect as the one on Tatzel's sacrifice, increasing attack speed and movement speed. By finishing the circlet, his skills also had improved, with enchantment jumping to close to 40% and goldsmith reaching roughly 10%. Checking his stats, the blacksmith rubbed his eyes. He had not realized it earlier, but he was really tired. With the sudden wave of inspiration waning, he noticed that it was already late at night. He stretched his tired bones and quickly made his way up into the warm embrace of his mattress. Chapter 625. First 1 and 2. He quite enjoyed waking up the next day as he was squeezed in between his two most favorite things in bed, the mattress and Mina. Other good news followed when Mary sent someone with a rough estimation of their loot, their compensation from the Nagelv Guild. They had managed to take back most of the items, except for some potions that had already been used. In addition, there was a plethora of items, materials, and money the plunder confiscated from the guild vault. Overall, the situation had ended in a net profit and an insight. Seth spent the morning making another legendary firewall to install them in his two heads of administration, Mary and Jane. He didn't have the time now, but he decided to make weaker versions for all members of the administration later on. Even with Tanamol's supply of souls, he didn't have the materials to make legendary anti-mind control items for everyone that worked for Mina's march. Not all of them needed the option to eradicate the enemy at any cost, not if it bore the risk for them and the items to be disintegrated. With the second circlet, he was another step closer to his goal. Another 16 or 17 legendary items and he would have reached master in all his 3 main skills. It was time for the next step of the plan. The reactivation of his previous plan to semi-mass-produced legendary rings. It was time to create a legendary pipe. It slightly veered from his original plan, but he spent until evening making a pipe. And what a mighty pipe it was! With the forging ballad of magic, praising the whoring around of Marut and Harut, he had imbued fundamental properties to enhance magic into the material. From this pipe, he was able to cut 10 work pieces and refine them into legendary rings for the casters of Mina's march. The blacksmith used the sigil rings he made for the members as templates, giving all the rings a consistent design. After giving it some thought, he also used the same engravings on all of them, to make them the ultimate template of a magic ring. Although they all started with the same base, Seth used his other skills in enchantment and special souls to customize them for each recipient. It was just a shame that he did not have enough Olympian enchantments for all of them. He was not embarrassed to admit that he had hogged most of those that were fit to be used on accessories and armor. Those that were left were already reserved for those that fit them the best. It was one of the reasons why he rather wished to give everyone a new weapon, as he had a lot of divine enchantments that seemed to be more fitting for weapons. There were a great many that had to do with the punishments in Tartaros, for example, and Seth was afraid to create a cursed item, as in one that would bring harm to the wearer. He still remembered his experiment with the frigid male at the stronghold of the theocracy. This was why Seth decided to call upon his demonic patrons when it came to enchanting the souls for the rings. A soul fitting the wearer's disposition and a demonic enchantment to spice things up. On the 3rd day, after finishing the 6th of these rings, he finally got the notification that ding! Your skill enchantment, craftsman, leave 9 has become enchantment, master, leave 1. Ding! Title, Master Enchanter gained. You have reached the master tier in enchantment plus 10 intelligence, unlocked function, formation combination. Ding! Title, the first gained. You are the first player to become a master enchanter on this server. Every item description of every item you made so far will be retroactively edited to include this title and your achievement. A new function had opened, however, Seth's mind was currently hung up on the last notification. What was that about? He had never heard about such a thing. The flavor text of any item he ever made would change? This seemed like a huge thing, but Seth had no idea what he was to gain from this. When he found that he wouldn't find any answer by staring at the title, he turned to look at this new function. Its name, Formation Combination, suggested it to be something like an automatic version of his previous ability to combine and simplify magic circuits to be able to enchant an item with more, or stronger, effects. Technically, the level of master would have also allowed Seth to create his own magic circuits, like magical enchanters at this level would. However, Seth was not interested in stuffing his head with all the theoretical knowledge needed to create formations from the ground up. He much preferred the power of the formation combination. The new function he found attached to his enchantment catalog felt a little like a gacha, but it only cost mana to use. How it worked was simple. Seth could choose up to 4 formations he already learned, and the formation combination would attempt to combine them, with varying results. While the blacksmith's manual combination and simplification using the skill and good old brain power would result in a circuit that would be an amalgamation of the different parts, the result of formation combination could end up much simpler and have unforeseen synergistic effects between the combined parts. It seemed like telling an AI to make a random combination that would somehow work. The description said that it could result in a circuit that is even better than the sum of its parts, which was the most interesting aspect of this new function. He would always play with it when he had some downtime over the following days. Seth kept trying combinations of attribute circuits, without much success. Either the success rate was low, or they just were not made for each other. Aside from the new function, the effects of the enchantments after becoming a master also rose by another 10 to 20% when compared to before. With the 9th ring, his goldsmith almost leveled up, but another notification he had looked forward to came. Ding! Title, Brainiac gained. You have reached 200 points in intelligence. Plus 2 universal attribute points. His intelligence had finally reached 200 points from the attribute points he gained through his title and the legendary items. Seth quite enjoyed being able to improve his attributes this way, especially since other methods became harder to use. Link's food would occasionally still give him a point, but it became a lot less since they lacked ingredients. This was not just Seth's problem, he had heard that it was common for people on high levels to stagnate, since level UPS were the only reliable way for most to improve their main attributes. Sometimes Seth would lament his quick growth since he missed the best time to grow one's attributes with food and potions, which worked better on lower levels because it was harder to get ingredients to improve already high attributes. Potions with universal applicability like the one Allison made were extremely rare. However, by making legendary items, Seth had a comfortable way to improve all his attributes across the board. Despite being very happy about it, the blacksmith was sure this wouldn't go on forever. He doubted the system would just give him power for free, so he dreaded the day when the notification wouldn't sound out. Finally, with the 10th ring. Ding! Your skill Goldsmith, Craftsman, Leave 9 has become Goldsmith, Master, Leave 1. Ding! Title, Master Goldsmith gained. You have reached the Master rank in Goldsmith plus 10 Dexterity, unlocked function, Punch. Ding! Title, the first 2 gained. You are the first player to become a Master Goldsmith on this server. Every item description of every item you made so far will be retroactively edited to include this title and your achievement. Finally, he had reached the Master tier in Goldsmith, too. If he was honest, he had been tired of making accessories over the past weeks and was glad that would now be able to concentrate on weapons and armor. Blacksmith was the only one left that was not Master tier. He had spent a little less than a week on the other 2, which meant he now had 2 weeks to become a Master Blacksmith and make the items for his friends before they set off to the Adventurer Guild's Holy Land. He just sat down and put his tool away, when a sudden light emanated from his chest. The spot was hot and felt as if it was sucking energy from his body. It didn't hurt, on the contrary, he felt good and came with a sense of euphoria. Seth quickly realized what was happening. This was Punch, the new function. It was not the punch as in hitting people, though. Slowly, a golden stamp exited from his chest. A rectangular, roughly 10 centimeters long stick with a small negative of a seal at the tip. This was his seal, his stamp. The function that was unlocked with the master level was the same as the blacksmith's mark he would get when he became a master blacksmith. Using this stamp created by the system, he could mark his finished items, making them recognizable for anyone with eyes, even those without an appraisal skill. He immediately tested it, by punching the ring he had just finished. After punching it, he found that the punch had another effect. He quickly punched the others to ascertain that the punch in fact had a reinforcing effect on the rings and their durability slightly increased. The punch that now decorated all the rings looked like a tiny hammer surrounded by a halo of flames. The seal chosen by the system didn't strike him as the coolest possible signature, but he somehow felt connected with it. He was sure it would grow on him. Chapter 626. Helmet of Cryas. Seth's actions had some repercussions, but none he was really afraid of. Since there were not really any people around when the blacksmith enacted his own justice, there were only rumors about a conflict between the guilds. People doubted the fairness of the compensation, especially the members of the Neljev Guild who had to hand back the items. Yes, there were some badly beaten members and the Neljev Guild master was missing an arm. But that was all. Nobody could do anything as the parties involved denied anything happening. Although their reputation took a light hit, it quickly paled in the face of other news. Delta was currently in chaos as constantly news kept surfacing. Whether it was a new champion rising to fame, a change in the leaderboards, or information from the expedition teams and settlers. Nobody had time to get hung up on something small as an, officially, non-violent conflict between guilds. Among the news was also praise for Minas Mar, which kept flowing back from the first expedition team sent to Tree Station 1. With Karina actively helping, their endeavor to install facilities and infrastructure was quickly progressing. The second group of settlers was already prepared to set off soon. The quicker, the better. Although the incidents among the refugees from Sigma had decreased thanks to the heightened presence of guards, the divine strength drug and disappearances were still a problem. Seth didn't know whether the church's fishing in these troubled water were a curse or a blessing. Like Minas Mar, which offered people a way out of the city, many religions could offer solace for the victims of the divine strength drug and they kept collecting lay members. With Mary skillfully managing the public perspective of the incident, it, unfortunately, did not have the effect Seth would have liked. He had wanted to make an example of the Neljev Guild, for others not to mess with Minas Mar, but Mary had completely diffused his message. Who knew when one of these growing forces picked a fight with them? Don't worry. For most of these higher UPS it is pretty obvious what happened, even when the official version looks different, Mary had assured him when he voiced doubts. She was right, the clever ones with a good head would probably know, and it was good that these more bothersome people would think twice, but what about the idiots who didn't think even once? The blacksmith had seen enough brutes among adventurers to know, that one should never bet on the intelligence of the opponent. At his request, they put a few more of the oath guards with relic-rated sets at the shops, just in case. The first thing Seth did after stamping the 10 magic rings he had made was hand them out quickly. The reason was the small addition to the ring's flavor text after he used the punch on them. As he was checking the effects of the seal, he found that there was an additional sentence in the flavor text. Like with the relic-rated armors, it stated that there was a minuscule chance for the rings to reach the myth rank. The blacksmith didn't really know what exactly constituted the myth rank, he barely had an idea of the legendary rank. Since the system blocked Al from explaining, he could only make assumptions based off the item descriptions of relic items in Al-Zalsar's soul. Becoming a legend was definitely a qualitative change in power, no matter whether it was a player, an item, or a material. It also had something to do with accumulation, otherwise, the sorceress couldn't be close to becoming a legend. Based on that he guessed that for an item to rise in rank, it had to be used, which was why he handed them out, so they could start using them as soon as possible. There were only 2 weeks left, they would need time to get used to the items. Exactly this time frame gave Seth heartache. Over the past months, Seth had tried to get used to making items thoroughly and methodically instead of using the power of his crafting stations to rush them. With so little time left, he saw himself forced to quicken his progress. He started off with Mike's helmet. Like most lords, he was attached to the items Seth had previously made for him, so decided to make him a helmet, which he was still lacking. The divine enchantment he chose was a major influence on the design of the helmet for the beastman. Starting with the Olympian silver, he chose a basic helmet shape similar to his own to give the sword demon a good field of vision and maneuverability. Now the biggest problem for beastmen when it came to helmets was the ears. Now he couldn't just leave holes for the ears, instead, he attached ram-like horns. They were the epic-rated horn of a boss monster called Idorum, Monique's team had hunted a while ago. The horns gave the helmet a barbaric and aggressive flair. This wasn't necessarily Seth's style, but it would fit better with the divine enchantment, the blessing of Crius. Crius, the titan of the southern sky. The best he could find about this titan was that he had a connection to rams, which was why he made the item a ram helmet. As he saw it fitting, he asked Nico to make the inner lining of the helmet from sky silk. Since Mike's secondary class was Focus Warrior, the blacksmith didn't even bother with a lot of other enchantments and went full ham on willpower. Even the forging ballad was chosen with this in mind. Coincidentally, Seth had managed to get the soul of a Creedorum, a creature similar to an Idorum and known for its terrible stubbornness. Another form of willpower. The soul was only rare but of massive size. The blacksmith found that he had chosen correctly when he felt the presence of Crius for the first time. Crius felt like a tower of strength, like a warrior and a guardian of iron will. It fit very well with Mike's attributes. Soon the notifications rang. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! Several synergies of powers have changed your item. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Helmet of Crius. Legendary. Physical DEF 2500. Mag, Def 2400. Physical.dmg, 800. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 Gift of Aureas. 3 Stubborn. 4 Blessing of the Southern Sky. 5 + 150 Willpower. 6 Passive Skill, Predator. 7 Passive Skill, Crius Strength 8. Passive Skill, Butting Heads 9. Active Skill, Ram Charge. A mighty offensive helmet with a peculiar design by the hands of craftsman Smith, enchanted by the first master enchanter of Earth, Master Smith using divine, demonic and mysterious means. A piece of equipment that strongly discourages anyone in the know from arguments with the wearer. Seth almost laughed when he saw the third option, however, the laugh got stuck in his throat when he saw the effect of Stubborn. Stubborn, the wearer is incorrigibly stubborn. Mental crowd control effects such as stun, fear, sleep, confusion, charm, are severely weakened and cannot last longer than 10 seconds. Physical crowd control effects such as snare, bind, root, are slightly weakened. Even if this wasn't the kind of offensive the description meant, Seth felt offended by how strong this effect was. 10 seconds were long in a fight, but the point was that these effects would be severely weakened. With a high willpower stat and this effect, this was technically like an immunity against all weaker effects. And 10 seconds was nothing when it meant that it could even neutralize the effects of something vastly more powerful. The gift of Aureas and the passive skill Predator were the effect of Seth's demonic ballad. While the first majorly improved the state of mind, the second slightly improved all stats when on a hunt and gave the wearer the aura of a predator, which could intimidate weaker enemies. Blessing of the Southern Sky was a conditional improvement of attributes, like that of the Sky Robe. When under the open sky, all attributes would increase by 10%, while they would rise by 15% when the sun was in the southern sky. It seemed that the blessing of Cryas had influenced most of the effects, but only the passive skill Cryas Strength had his name. The skill improved the wearer's physical damage and mental power by another 20%. The last two skills had to be a mix of Cryas, the horns, and the soul he used. Passive skill, butting heads. Headbutts deal 300% more damage. Active skill, ram charge, no cost, cooldown, 5 minutes. You can build walls in my path, I will simply walk through them. Get your horns aligned and charge in a straight line at your target with 3 times your usual movement speed. You will deal 5 times your physical damage as a headbutt to anything in your way. Chapter 627. 15 times the damage. Seth already thought that his unbridled charge with his high agility and almost immunity to damage was terrifying. But if someone like Mike, who put more than half his stats into strength, started charging with this helmet, dealing 15 times his base physical damage. Even when not taking the charge into account, the helmet had 800 physical damage, which meant it could add 2,400 damage to any headbutts. The only drawback was that it was a straight rush and that nothing mentioned the wearer staying unharmed from the impact. After all, Mike was a cat boy, not a ram boy. Who knew if his neck could take it? Maybe he would have to make an additional gorget and pauldrons for Mike that could somehow dampen the blow, like the setup a racing helmet had. Seth mused about possible ways but made no concrete plans. His blacksmith was now at roughly 20%. He still had some way to go and no time to spare. It was now early evening, and with the effects of his crafting stations, he had managed to finish Mike's helmet within several hours. Seth's efforts bore fruits in a much appreciated way. Despite the increase in speed, he had crafted the helmet just as skillfully and properly as he did, when he took his time. It was a sign that his fundamental skills had majorly improved over the past months. The blacksmith's heart warmed, to see that his hard work was not without results. That the quickened process did not mean a drop in quality gave him hope to finish all the items in time. With this speed, 2 fresh bars of legendary Olympian silver found their way into the furnace. Next on the line was Tekker. His armor and shield were both relic rated and he liked them very dearly. In the meantime, the giant man had also played the game that Seth had taken inspiration from for the armor and wouldn't accept being separated from them. The only thing Tekker agreed to switch out was the giant club. Although it was powerful and fit the aesthetic, Tekker never got used to using it and instead rather wielded the cursed fang shield because of the crowd control effects it could deliver. I don't know, instead of the club or the shield, I would prefer something I could wield easier to stack status effects. However, I'm also not really good with sophisticated weapons. No offense to your skills, but could you maybe make me a pipe? Tekker explained at the question of what kind of item he would like. At that time, Seth was incredulous and could not really react, so the big guy kept talking to explain himself. Why, you see, this is a little embarrassing, but I was quite rowdy when I was a kid. I calmed down a lot when I met Ruby's mother, but back then a pipe was always my weapon of choice. Do you think I could have one? This explained why Tekker was so tough. Even when he had a class that excelled in defense alone, he had managed to make a living in the tumultuous times right after the apocalypse. Before Seth had only been confused by the choice of weapon, he was not really offended. My man, you may not believe me, but I have quite the experience in making magic pipes and mighty rods. I will make you the meanest piece of street cutlery you have ever seen. Hearing the man's reasons, Seth could help but smile excitedly, at the thought of Tekker in his thick armor, with his massive shield, swinging around a pipe like a street thug. This mental image was the best reason to go through with it. Everyone knew them, the 3 kings of makeshift weapons. The pipe, the brick, and the crowbar, and now he was in the process of reviving one of these legends. He had just recently honed his skills in forging a pipe when he made the legendary rings. However, this couldn't be just any pipe. It obviously also needed the elbow fitting as the head of the weapon. It would be light, it would be fast, it would be hefty, and loaded with curses. Seth would have liked to use the ballad of mind-related curses on the pipe, as he had done on the cursed Fang shield, but souls that could offset the side effects of the curses were rare. He had been very lucky to get souls like that in the fog dimension, although their adventure itself was an unlucky one. He also had nobody to bargain with using channeling and soul trade. Something he found out during his study at the college, was that the songs Alzalsar had taught him were ancient and common classics among demons. They were songs that called upon the power of entities that had become some kind of principle themselves. These songs could be used by anyone and would always be answered to a degree. The professor had explained it to him, but the concept was hard to grasp for Seth. What he took from it was: first, these demons lost their name and ego when they ascended to a principle. Second, since there was no name or ego, he could do nothing to manipulate the fundamental principle behind these enchantments. Even when Seth wanted to give it a slew of curses, he didn't have a way to counteract the side effect, and other demons usually had their specializations. Even if he used several demonic enchantments, it would not be what he wanted. For just a moment, he even thought of writing an original song or joke to call upon Shock, who seemed well versed in original curses. He quickly came back to his senses and quickly cast away that idea. There were other ways to make a broken weapon, aside from risking his life. Seth decided to use the forging ballad to add random curses on hit, which would in itself become quite powerful, with headed 75% attack speed from Blessing of Wind. For the pipe, he used legendary Olympian silver and even went a step further and used a piece of the special bones of Seth for the elbow fitting for the extra kick of giving it a chaotic note. The blacksmith tried for a while to actually cut a thread to combine the parts, before he lost his patience and just welded them together. When it came to the enchantment, originally Seth thought of using engravings to add negative status effects, instead of demonic etchings, since he felt more confident to cram more of them onto a pipe. However, he now had a new option. Formation combination. Ever since Seth had gotten the new option, he played with it whenever he had mana. He tried to fuse the complex formation for paralyze, noise, blind, and fear. His high luck and the little Laplace skill really increased his chance for usable formation, but it took about 300 tries and several bottles of mana potion before he got something he was happy with. Sleep paralysis formation. With a chance of 15% on hit, it could activate any of the 4 effects, and with a 5% chance on hit, it could activate sleep paralysis, which meant a combination of all of them at once. The target would stiffen in place, with white noise filling their ear, darkness blocking their sight, and an inexplicable feeling of fear filling their mind. Since this counted as only one complex formation, Seth also engraved silence and endurance, aside from the sleep paralysis formation. When it came to the soul, Seth had splurged a little. There were quite a few souls that help a possibility for negative effects, but the one that really intrigued Seth was the soul of a malignant spirit called the Offhawker. A creature would shapeshift to trick a person and find a way to either be carried or jump on their back. Once the creature managed to get on a wanderer's back, its weight would keep increasing with every step the man took, until they would either die under the weight or reached home, which was the only way to survive for an ordinary person. Offhawker's soul, rare, big, crafting material. The soul of an evil spirit that will burden its victims to death. Trait, curse of burden, talent, shapeshift. The soul had no high rating, nor was it very big, but it was the first time Seth saw a soul with a trait. Tanomole had suggested this soul when Seth asked him for souls with special negative abilities. Although the soul's rating seemed like nothing special, it price rivaled a massive soul because of the scarcity of this kind of creature. They were hard to find and even harder to catch. The divine enchantment he chose to combine with this kind of soul was the bind of the Alodes. The Alodes were 2 giant brothers, Otis and Ephialtes, that once tried to storm Mt. Olympus to steal Hera and Artemis as their wives. They even managed to catch Ares and lock him in a jar for a lunar year. Since the enchantment mentioned their mind, it was clear that their punishment in Tartarus was meant, which was to be bound by serpents to a column with a blood-sucking bird on the column. The blacksmith believed the effect to either be a strong bind, or a strong bind with a damage over time effect. The sigil he engraved on the soul pipe looked just like that, a stylized pair of men bound to a column with a bird sitting atop. The moment he finished it, rows of snakes slithered all over the soul pipe, covering it in their patterns. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! Several synergies of powers have changed your item. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Chapter 628. The Pipe. The pipe. Legendary. Physical damage, 2555. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 Sock M. 3 Jump M. 4 plus 200% power to skills and spells. 5 30% chance to add a random curse on hit. 6 Curse of Burden. 7 Sleep Paralysis. 8 15% chance on hit to cause silence. 9 plus 85 Endurance. 10 Active Skill, Allod's Destiny. A true classic reborn by the hands of craftsman Smith. The weapon of choice for any thug, delinquent, or mobster in its most high-caliber form, yet. Enchanted by the first master enchanter of Earth, Master Smith using divine and mysterious means. A horribly weapon for anyone to face and wield. Seth made some test swings with the pipe. It had a good heft and felt very satisfying to swing around. It was pretty good, although the last sentence of the flavor text heavily confused Seth until he read the description of the Curse of Burden. After reading it he couldn't help but admit that it was the perfect weapon for Tekker. The trait Curse of Burden had taken a slight change from its original form, most likely because of the divine enchantment. Curse of Burden. With every successful hit, a unique burden counter is added to the target and the wielder. A counter vanishes after 30 seconds if not stacked. Can be stacked until one party dies. A weight that would slow one down and make them sluggish to the point they could die. It didn't specify how much burden was added per counter, but Seth could see why this was an absolute nightmare for any wielder. That was, any wielder aside from Tekker. With the man's unique second class, the bulwark, immovability, and weight theoretically strengthened his defense, which would turn the Curse of Burden into a blessing, as long as Tekker didn't go too far. The two other effects Seth had to wonder about were Sock M and Jump M. After analyzing the items for a while he came to the conclusion, that these were the effects of the bones of Seth in a synergy with the enchantments. Sock M doubled the physical damage of any blunt force attack and tripled the damage from underhanded attack and attack on vitals. Jump M was a charged attack, that allowed to jump to a target's back and smack their skull. The only requirement was for the target to face away. The Allod's Destiny was like Seth expected, a guaranteed bind for up to 10 minutes on hit, whereas the duration depend on the strength of the enemy. While bound, enemies would suffer a bleeding effect also based on their strength. With this many effects, it was safe to say that Tekker would be able to dispense more than one negative status effect with every strike. Even without a dedicated weapon skill, the tank would be able to cause damage that was hard to ignore thanks to Sock M. Seeing how the skills came out, he almost regretted that he didn't use a different ballad. One for conniving and underhanded means would have also fit well with some of the other effects, however, this wasn't what Tekker needed as a tank. Maybe Seth could make another rendition of this if they ever had a thug or delinquent join them with a fitting class. Seth? Why are you playing around with a pipe? He suddenly heard Mina's voice from the door, as he was weighing the pipe in his hand, lost in thought. Mina? What brings you here? You, dummy. It's already so late and you didn't come to bed. She said with a pout. He was wearing a bathrobe, but Seth could see what she was wearing below. He immediately got the hint. It was already past midnight. Sorry, I didn't look at the time. I can see you were quite satisfied playing with your pipe on your own, she said mischievously. HMHM, you are right. Maybe I should stay and work a little more, he countered mockingly. No. I mean, you shouldn't overwork yourself. Please, come to bed with me. Oh, it seems like you wish to witness my pipe-wielding skills in private. PFF, yeah. Please, show me your skills with the pipe. The two hurriedly scampered back to their quarters, making bad pipe puns along the way. Delta. The rain was pouring. The light of the bustling city reflected by the empty streets and desolate buildings formed chaotic swirls of colors in front of her eyes. Water kept soaking into the worn-out shoes as she trudged along the boardwalk. Bitter cold bit her through her drenched clothes as if she wore nothing. If only she was old enough to get a class, then she would be stronger. Then she could have, all she could do was try to find someone. Her parents, everyone relied on her. By sheer power of will her frozen feet kept moving, towards the bustling light she could see in the distance. The lights were all she focused on. She had to reach people and then find help. She suddenly felt a hand grab her shoulder and a shadow blocked her light of hope. Girl, are you all right? She finally heard it. A soft warm voice spoke to her. A soft, warm palm touched her ice-cold cheek. The shadow took shape and she could recognize a person. It was an older woman, She had a wrinkly face with a warm smile. The woman wore a beige-colored robe which seemed really bright in the night and a tippet of slightly darker color. Was she a priest? She had heard of priests before they caught her. They said that priests could help them. She hurried to press sound from her sore throat. Are you a priestess? I need help. We need. Yes, I'm a servant of G. A disgusting warmth suddenly splattered on her face and a shiny point was right in front of her eyes. Behind the priestess with wide open eyes and blood spurting from her neck and mouth had appeared another shadow. A shadow she knew. What do you think you are doing here, brat? The dagger was pulled back with a shower of blood and the kind old priestess collapsed on the ground, lifeless. Look what you made me do. Only because you tried to run away. Who will take responsibility for this? Her heart fell as despair and panic took hold of her mind. She couldn't be caught again. She wasn't able to get help yet. She couldn't go back to that place. Everyone was counting on her. Despite her thoughts, she was petrified, as the shadow came closer, towering over her. A sudden stream of warm energy circulated through her body and cleared her mind. The shadow that was about to grab her also suddenly halted. Both looked at the ground, where the dead priestess wasn't so dead at all. Run, she commanded the girl with a raspy voice, as her hand tightened around the shadow's ankle. With tears in her eyes, strengthened by the old woman's buff, she ran. Towards the light, towards help. Before long the girl was gone. This doesn't change anything. She is marked with our demonic scent. You sacrificed your last breaths in vain, the figure said sadistically. He wanted to see the despair in this meddler's face. But when he looked down, he found her face expressionless with black tears running down her cheeks and eyes as dark as the night. Kukiku, you thought I was sacrificing myself. The grip on his ankle suddenly became strong enough that it would have crushed an ordinary person's flesh. If he had not reinforced his skin and bones, he may have lost a foot. A quick glint in the night, but the blade with which he tried to cut off the old crone's arm, was caught by her other hand. What are you? He exclaimed in shock, seeing his swallow blade caught by a bare hand. I am a servant of Gatries, the goddess of dark mercy. The girl is mine. With a wicked smile, she stood up. As she pulled on his ankle, he let go of his sword, to use the motion and deliver a kick to her face, without effect. I put a lot of effort into my first impression, I could not let you ruin it. How would I catch her later if she saw this? The cultivator's face distorted in unimaginable horror as his screech echoed in the night. Chapter 629. The Gruesome and Grim. Seth felt motivated when he returned to the workshop. At this pace he would be able to finish all items a week before they had to set off, giving everyone some time to get used to the new equipment. The next item on his list was one for Phaenis, the mountain brigand that had joined them after the evaluation in Krna. This was the first custom-made item he personally made for her. Although he had a little tryst with her and Mina in Krna, they had not hung out after they returned. Her current equipment was freely chosen from the items Seth and Cerberus held back for members of Mina's march. When he asked her what she would like, she surprisingly had a list of things for Seth to choose from. She wanted either a quick one-handed short sword, a crossbow, a quiver, or a throwing axe. A crossbow needed a lot of fine-tuning and the Olympian silver was a better fit for weapons that were wielded, rather than thrown. The blacksmith chose the quickest option for him, a short sword. Seth had a lot of practice in forging a yatagan and he had taken quite a liking to its overall shape. From a bar of silver, he was able to quickly shape the swift saber. Phaenis had not mentioned any preferences for the power of the weapon, as long as it allowed her quick attacks. Working with that, Seth chose the forging ballad dedicated to Botus, the sword-wielding snake demon. His power could help in wielding a sword quickly and unpredictably, like the attacks of a viper. The price was that the weapon would deal the wielder double the damage if he was clumsy enough to hurt himself with his own weapon. For the handle, he used bones from the Titanoboas, which made him a little nostalgic for the time he used to make weapons from snake bones all the time. For the enchantments, he chose poison, fitting the snake theme. Aside from the deadly poison enchantment and dexterity, he also found a poem that could imbue the same powers as the forging ballad of decay. Lately, he had tried to avoid enchanting weapons with more than one demonic source, but these works that called upon powers that had already become principles seemed to be similar to neutral enchantments, such as those that increased attributes. Since they had little possibility to negatively interfere with other enchantments, he was able to use them without many worries. Along the bait of the one-edged blade, he etched in demonic runes that meant something along the lines of, "With only a touch, I have the power. Zamzam Rim Vim. To wither man and flower. I find delight in the gruesome and grim. It was only one verse of an incomplete piece, but it had a similar power to the forging ballad of decay he had used previously. After a last polishing of the sharpened blade, he switched over to working on the soul. According to Phaenus's specification, he managed to find a soul that should have been able to satisfy her desire for quick and fast attacks. Soul of a sickle-limbed weasel, big, epic, crafting material. The soul of a weasel-like beast with bone blades for appendages, known for its unearthly fast and sharp attacks. Talent, blade wielding, quick draw, blade ghost. Seth had never seen, nor heard of such a creature until Tunamole suggested its soul to him. The talents were decent and fit his criteria almost too well. The last step was the Olympian enchantment. For this, he chose Menoetius' destiny. The blacksmith had used the blessing of Menoetius previously, which offered a rush of strength. However, the destiny of Menoetius was being struck down by Zeus with lightning and being banished to Tartarus as a cripple. It was not an enchantment Seth would put on an armor, but it was a promising story for a weapon. The sigil of Menoetius' destiny was a human figure covered in chaotic lines that could be depicting lightning. The same lines covered the soul Yatagan after Seth finished the engraving. Everything was as usual up to this point. He infused the soul into the weapon without any problems and offered it to the waters of Styx when the floating bubble of water suddenly started churning. Dark tendrils seemed to have invaded the sphere and were entering the floating Yatagan. More glowing runes appeared on the weapon's blade as if etched by invisible hands. Magnificent, marvelous, mad. Seth tried to interpret the runes, but it seemed like a kind of dialect. Something about the size of a house, the size of a mouse, ugliness and beauty. Only when the last rune's glow receded did the tendrils disappear and the waters stopped churning. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Ding! The interference of a demonic entity has changed your item. The last notification at least gave him some kind of answer to what had happened just now. He would have never thought that a demon would intervene on their own to change an item. This was unprecedented for Seth. However, when checking the blade's information, he found that it was not a bad impact, even though the name became a little weird. The marvelous, magnificent, mad Yatagan Mim. Legendary. Physical damage, 2600. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 plus 200% power on skills and spells. 3 Artifice of Botus. 4 Poison of Botus. 5 plus 150 Dexterity. 6 Blade Ghost. 7 Destiny of the Sinner. 8 Powers of Mim. 9 A Sporting Chance. A cruel weapon created by craftsman Smith and enchanted by Master Smith, the first master enchanter of Earth, using divine and demonic means. A mischievous presence looking for entertainment has completed an ancient enchantment, furthering the blade's malice. The mercy of the blade can never be trusted. Seth stared at the thing for a while. Although it did not seem as spectacular as other legendary items that lent the user a lot of skill, there was a lot to unpack on this weapon. The power of Botus had actually reacted with different elements of the weapon, creating 2 different effects. His poison seemed like the synergy between the enchantment, the demonic power, and the snake bone handle. It could inflict the deadly poison effect with a 20% chance and stack it up to 10 times. His artifice was a reaction between his blade skill and the soul of the weasel. This effect had absorbed quick draw and blade wielder from the soul and became an effect that would lend the carrier a vast array of blade skills to create a more unpredictable fighting style based on pure speed. Together with the Blessing of Wind, which raised attack speed by 75% and movement speed by 25%, the Artifice of Botus already made the weapon a great success. But in addition to that, Blade Ghost was preserved as an additional effect. It could allow the wielder to hide his presence for a short time, turning practically invisible, for a quick deadly attack. Destiny of the Sinner was a 50% chance to deal additional lightning damage, with a 25% chance to cause paralysis and burns. As if it was not enough, there were the powers of Mim. The first being decay on hit. The second was to change the size of the weapon, ranging between a dagger and a big long sword. The third was to change its appearance, switching between an old rusty look that could add asepsis to wounds and a polished finish that increased the chance to cause bleeding by 5%. Lastly, there was a sporting chance. Seth now understood the last sentence on the notification. This effect actually lowered the attack power of the wielder when facing a weaker opponent, thus giving them a chance on the surface. However, it also increased the wielder's attack speed by the same percentage it lowered the attack. Not even mentioning all the other effects of the weapon that would outright devastate any opponent, even if the damage was weakened, the base damage of the Yatagan was so high, that a lower damage and higher speed just meant a guaranteed death by 1,000 cuts to a weaker opponent. Seth was almost tempted to keep this weapon to himself and simply make something else for Phaenis. Despite such tempting thoughts, Seth decided to give the weapon to the mountain brigand. She was much better equipped to bring out the weapon's true power. Since she was bound by a soul contract anyways, her power was his power. Giving it to her would only grow his power even further than when wielding it himself. Chapter 630. Home harvested. After the little shock by the sudden demonic intervention, Seth got back his bearings and continued. As much as he liked to marvel at his new creation, he was on a tight schedule and planned to make another one today. The next one was for Duhu, the tiger Tijaya, who decided to stay with Minasmar, together with Drosy and the others. The big cat person asked for something surprisingly normal. He just asked for an axe. Seth had been waiting for someone to ask for an axe because he had a peculiar enchantment for this. The axe of Polytechnus, an enchantment made by the god of Blacksmith, but without explicit divine powers. The blacksmith had unlocked it with a slew of other enchantments when he reached the master tier in enchantment. The extremely complicated enchantments seemed to mimic the natural patterns of the divine ones, but they had unlimited uses. They had only two common drawbacks. One was that the whole weapon needed to be covered with the formation, leaving no room for other enchantments. The other was that they could only be used on weapons made from Olympian silver. In addition, this specific one was restricted and could only be used on an axe. Other enchantments he had unlocked at level 1 were basic ones along the lines of Olympian sharpness, Olympian durability, Olympian speed, and so on. The only other one notable at level 1 was simply called Automaton Core Circuit. As the name said, it was a standardized circuit to create the control core for an automaton or golem. The blacksmith had technically no need for this kind of technology, but he was not arrogant enough to look down on something developed by Hephaestus. Still, he didn't currently have the time, which was why he would have to test it at a later time. His only reason he even considered using the axe of Polytechnus, when he had little clue what it would do, was because he was that curious about it. It was also because of Duhu. He was a straightforward power player, too many complicated effects seemed counterproductive for the Tigerman. He had no idea what exactly was going to do, as he found little information on the axe itself, or Polytechnus for that matter. He was a carpenter who was turned into a woodpecker after some tragic events. The most he could find was that the powers of the axe were attributed to the woodpecker. Obviously, Seth didn't intend to make a carpenter axe, despite the original being one. The blueprint the blacksmith chose was an elegant war axe with a crescent blade in the front and a sharpened spike reminiscent of a war pick in the back. He also deliberated on adding a spike on top, but he doubted the enchantment would do anything for that. Forging the axe head was delightfully classic blacksmith work, only disrupted by the eerie droning of the slaughterer's anthem Seth was singing to the beat of the hammer strikes. It was the ballad he had once used for Mike's flaming fury. The demonic ballad offered a temporary increase in strength per kill in combat. Despite it being a huge strain on the user's will, Seth now had ample souls to mitigate this effect by paying up front. It wasn't the same as back then when he had to make Mike's sword in an emergency situation. After he finished the axe head, there was a choice to make. Either he would make the handle from legendary material, 2, or he used Karina's super wood. After some thought, he was confident that he could cram the enchantment of Axe of Polytechnus on the axe head alone. Since this was an experiment, to begin with, he wanted to make a traditional axe with a wooden handle. He wasn't 100% sure, but he wanted to try and add other enchantments to the handle with Ithildan inlays. Since this Olympian enchantment did not automatically encroach on the whole item, he felt confident enough to continue with this decision. Before he even started on the handle, he began with the enchantment of the axe head. After all, no matter how confident he was, he first had to manage to complete the enchantment on the axe head. Even though he had reached the master level, the formation of Axe of Polytechnus was too hard for the blacksmith to fully understand. He was able to make sense of some of the parts, but most of the complicated patterns seemed like ornamental engravings to him, not like channels meant for the flow of magic power. Whether this was a blessing or a problem was unclear. He didn't need to understand them, to copy them using the help of the enchantment table. However, if he made a mistake somewhere and didn't notice, he would have no idea what he did wrong, or why it was a mistake. Carving the many fine patterns into the axe head took a lot more time than he had expected, much more than forging the axe head, or engraving one of the divine enchantments. Sweat started running down his forehead as he worked in absolute concentration, aided by the skill's absolute focus and craftsman's precision from his gauntlet. How long had it been that this kind of work had strained him this much? It was really worth being an enchantment made by a god. The skills of a master were a minimum requirement to have even a chance to succeed. By the time he finally finished enchanting the axe head, it was already late. Time had flown by without him noticing. He only felt a great wave of relief when he finally gave the piece its finishing touch. He tried to inject magic power into the axe head and it seemed to flow naturally through all the channels, giving him no reason to doubt his success. Seeing that he managed to cram the full enchantment onto the axe head alone, he started on the handle. With practiced movement, Seth carved a beautiful handle from the wood of the hanging tree, before once again sitting down at the enchantment table to carve out the channel for the inlays made of Ithildan. He did not wish to tempt fate and only used the complex circuits of strength and dexterity for Duhu's weapon. For the soul, Seth got to use a home-harvested one. It was the soul of a jackal chieftain, a dungeon boss. Jackals were a kind of humanoid monsters that appeared in dungeons. They were also the best source of high-grade blood to be used in the creation of bones of Seth. This chieftain in particular had the skills of an axe warrior. The reason he decided to use this soul, despite only being big and rare, was because it had a trait similar to the blade ghost. Soul of Jackal Chieftain, big, rare, crafting material. The soul of a mighty Jackal warrior and leader of his pack. Talent, axe-wielding, trait, manic cleaver. Having fought the beast he had an idea of what that trait was. The Jackal chief's attack speed had kept growing over the course of the fight. This fit well with the Slaughterer's Anthem and the Olympian enchantment he prepared for the axe. The enchantment was called the Touch of the Cur. The Kyrs were death spirits of violent death that were drawn to bloody deaths on battlefields because of their thirst for blood. Seth guessed that it had an effect like life drain or bleeding from what he found about the spirits. He couldn't really make any sense from the sigil, it didn't quite look like anything the blacksmith knew, which didn't stop him from engraving it. The resulting pattern that covered the soul was so light it was hard to discern, it was a kind of texture of sorts. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. A first. After handing the weapon over to the waters of Styx to fully fuse the infused soul and weapon to each other, only one notification rang out. Up to now, every legendary item he made had some kind of synergy happening that slightly changed its option. It did not happen this time. Seth was a little tired, so when he tried to pull the axe from the bubble of water, it slipped from his hand and fell to the ground, where the blade sang into the stone floor without a single sound. Chapter 631. Axe of Polytechnus. The poor floor. He pulled the battle axe out from the floor, leaving a big gash where it had stuck. Axe of Polytechnus, copy. Legendary. Physical damage, 2800. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 plus 200% power on skills and spells. 3 Blessing of Violence. 4 plus 500% damage against flora. 5 triple damage on cleaving strikes. 6 plus 65 strength. 7 plus 65 dexterity. 8 manic cleaver. 9 touch of the cur. 10 passive skill, Feast of the Kyrs. A brutal rendition of one of the lesser-known works of the god of blacksmiths, Hephaestus, by the hand of craftsman Smith and the first master enchanter of Earth, Master Smith. The perfect weapon to cut down trees and enemies alike. Even without any synergies, the effects were working great together, like a well-oiled machine. In a way, he felt prouder about this since the result was based purely on his own power and not the grace of a lucky synergy. Despite only roughly knowing some of the effects beforehand, the weapon was always planned to be optimized for drawn-out battles. This way Duhu would have more options in the future to save his trump card. Duhu was one of the blessed Tija that could call upon their bloodline and transform into a massive beast of unprecedented strength. This came with a rush of explosive strength, but it would have been wrong to say this didn't come at a price. The longer he would have to keep up this transformation, the bigger was the strain on his body. This axe was a way to solve this indirectly. He would not only be able to fight through a large number of enemies without transforming, it could even strengthen him while doing so. If he was then forced to transform, the transformation would be even stronger, making the potential time he needed to keep it up less. Checking the effects now, Seth found that things had worked out even better than originally planned. The Blessing of Violence offered temporary strength for every enemy killed, in exchange the experience gained would be slightly lower. The side effect was much better than potentially losing one's mind. Triple damage on cleaving was most likely an effect of Axe of Polytechnus and the reason his floor and a new scar. Same with the increased damage against plant life. As it was originally a carpenter ace, it made sense. The effect of Manic Cleaver was different from what Seth originally thought. It wasn't just some effect that increased attack speed with an axe. As if straight out of a hack and slay game, the effect relied on hit combos to progressively raise the wearer's strength in accordance with the number of successive hits. Lastly were the effects of the divine enchantment. Seeing their effects, Seth was somewhat glad he was wrong, about it maybe being a kind of bleed or damage over time effect. The touch of the cur was an effect that had a 50% to directly kill a mortally wounded enemy. Seth realized something after checking the final option of the axe, he was turning really into the protagonist of a hack and slay game. The Feast of the Cures on the other hand summoned the spectre of a cur at the beginning of a battle. This spectre had no offensive means, except looking hideous. Instead, it would fly around and feast upon the spilled blood in a radius of 25 m. Collected energy would heal the wielder if he was wounded. If he wasn't wounded, it would stack and create temporary buffs to strength and endurance of the wielder. It offered not just a way to heal in combat, but even power up, just like, or even better than, the Blessing of Violence. The longer and bloodier a battle became, the better it would be for the Tigerman. Seth imagines the future. Toho the Crimson Beast, his white fur dyed in red, as he gains strength from bathing in the blood of his enemies. Or maybe Seth the Crimson Beast? Nah, that sounded stupid. Again, the blacksmith was tempted to keep the weapon for himself but decided otherwise in the end. He checked his blacksmith skill a last time to see that it had reached 50% as planned before he packed the axe away and finished for the day. Seth teleported to his quarters, greeted Mina, changed clothes, and joined her on the couch. They had just started watching a movie when there was a wild knocking on their door. "Tower Master, are you in?" The couple shared a glance before Seth got up with a groan to answer the door. "What is it?" he asked the hurried-looking man. "Something happened on the surface. Lord Mary told me to call you." Seth looked at him for a moment, deliberating whether he really had to go. "Fine. I'm there in a moment. I guess something came up. I will go have a look," he explained to Mina, before getting dressed again. Not long later, Seth appeared in the lobby of Mina's Mars business building, exiting from the elevator room. He had just entered, when Mary already approached him. "I'm glad you came even though it's already late." "Sure. So what was so important that you had to call me?" he asked a little grumpy since he was tired from a day at the forge. Princess Lena and the council called for an emergency meeting at the Parliament building. All leaders of the powerful guilds were invited. It seems like something is happening in Delta. The council was the current leftovers of Delta's former leadership that were in the process of being reinstated with the support of Krina. There were even talks of elections in the near future. For them to call in an emergency meeting was unheard of. Well, wasn't like they had much of a chance with Krina taking care of most of the things. Was this maybe a move for them to finally get some exposure in the public? With Lena being involved, maybe this was the first step for Krina to take less influence on Delta's government. Seth wasn't into politics, so the best idea he could come up with. Mary had already prepared a car to take him to the Parliament building. It had been ages since Seth sat in a car. Although cars worked just fine in Delta, unlike Y-City, there were fewer of them on the streets nowadays. There were a few reasons. With the introduction of mounts, the inventory, and a player's physique, motorized vehicles became an unpopular alternative. The events of the apocalypse and during the tournament also had a profound impact on people. Nobody wanted to sit in a car when something went wrong and a portal randomly opened in the middle of the city. Mounts and walking by foot were a lot more practical in those scenarios. However, Seth could hardly use Puffles or Tatzel to ride through the city. Arriving at the Parliament building, Mary and Seth found a huge crowd of people that arrived earlier. All of them were most likely leaders of some well-known guild. Mary could name some of them off the top of her head. They were slowly ushered in and shown their seats. The Parliament, rows and rows of seats around a central podium resembling an ancient theatre. The seats that were once filled with representatives from the different districts, were now filled with powerful figures from all around Delta. Looking around as they followed their usher, it didn't seem like they only invited guild leaders. He saw Brock, Elsa, and Marcel not too far away. In a faraway corner, Seth even spotted Yvette. Just what was going on? The staff member led them all the way to the very front and actually seated them in the first row. In the same row, Seth found some familiar faces. McCarthy the dimensional traitor, Cade, Brock, Elsa, and Marcel, the stupid hero, and the mist demon, all of them were seated in the first row. Extrapolating from them, the others in the row were probably of no less importance or strength. Look, that's Guildmaster Bryce. Mary pointed at a man with slicked back blonde hair wearing a marine blue suit. It was Seth's first time personally seeing the local Guildmaster of the Adventurer Guild. Similar to Seth, Bryce made his subordinate do the work. Most of the official work of the guild was done by their vice-guildmaster. After a while, people stopped trickling in and a pudgy man stepped on the stage in the center. I thank you all for coming. Who is that? Seth whispered to Mary. He's the acting chancellor of Delta, Ichabod Longbottom, the scribe said in an almost scolding manner. All of you were called because we are facing a crisis. Chapter 632. Call of Nature. 2 hours ago a branch of the Gatries church was completely wiped out. There was a fight between high-level existences to the extent that not only all members of the church present in the building were killed, but the building itself was toppled, causing harm to the whole area. So it was just about something that neither concerned nor interested him. In the end, it wasn't like there were any civilians living in that place. Seth found himself thinking that it was overkill to call all the big shots of Delta because of that. However, he saw many people's faces full of shock. Maybe he had to reevaluate his opinion? He had to admit that his scale may have been a little skewed. After all, what was one building, when you personally burned down a city or 3? The church is pressuring us for an explanation. Initial investigation shows that the assailants have a high probability to be the same people that keep causing havoc in the refugee quarters. We hope all of you can help us collect more information so we can once and for all put an end to their activities in Delta. Seth had not cared about this in the beginning, but now his mood had hit rock bottom. They had not acted when the criminals messed with the refugees of Sigma, but the moment some foreign cult was struck, they suddenly see a need to step up in a grand manner. Delta's government had been mostly silent about the attacks. They didn't offer any incentives to persuade other guilds to help with the guard duties. Aside from standard police work, there had been no action to help the people before, aside from offering basic food and shelter. But now when some foreign force asked them to take responsibility, they suddenly stood up and acted. Seth knew that he was not someone who had covered himself in glory. He had not blamed anyone for not getting too deeply involved, but now they did it for this kind of reason? At least he was consistent in his slanted values. The blacksmith had only come because it said that Lena asked for his presence. He had thought he would just sit here and be bored while listening to stuff that didn't concern him. But now? Seeing as he felt thoroughly peeved, he saw no reason to stay. I would like to ask. We are leaving, Mary, the blacksmith informed her and attempted to stand up in the middle of the Chancellor's speech. Wait. What? We just came, why are we leaving? Mary tried holding him back. This publicity stunt is not worth any more of my sleeping hours. Seth stood up before Mary could say or do anything to stop him. Since he was seated in the very first row, he attracted a lot of attention with his move. Even the Chancellor halted for a moment and looked at him. Facing the gazes of many influential people, Seth completely ignored them and turned to leave. He may have been nervous a couple of years ago, but especially the perks of a bard helped a lot with dealing with the attention. He had made a few steps. The Chancellor was still silent and didn't continue to not just Seth's surprise, his move was like kicking off an avalanche. People he knew and people he didn't know suddenly also rose from their seats to follow his example leave. Some of them were friends, like Brock, Elsa, and Marcel, who had also been sitting quite prominently in the first row. Among the others were people he met as business partners, but also a lot of people he never met or saw. Overall, the Chancellor was facing a third of his audience suddenly standing up, as if Seth's move was a signal for the others. Wait, why are you leaving? The Chancellor suddenly called out. Although he seemed to ask all of the people leaving, his gaze was fixed on Seth's back, he could feel the man's stare drill into his back. He deliberated for a moment whether to say what was on his mind or just keep walking. He didn't mind if the government didn't make a move. He would have silently stayed seated if this was just about the situation of the refugees. But seeing they only acted because they were afraid of some stupid cult. When he looked back, he saw Lena in the audience for the time since he came in. Her eyes were on him, but she didn't seem to care that he was about to ruin this event. At least she didn't make any attempt or gave a signal to stop. It didn't seem like she would have minded if she blasted him, but then again, why should he tell the little man? Me? I have to answer the call of nature. Them too. The Chancellor looked at everyone who had followed his move. Seth theatrically turned around, following the Chancellor's move, looking at the people who were in the process of leaving too. "Dang, I guess have to hurry before they form a queue in front of the toilets," he answered sarcastically with a shrug. He then quickly left the hall, before the Chancellor could continue speaking. As if they were racing to the restrooms, the other people who had stood up followed after him. "Funny rascals. Mary, make sure to remember all of them. If they want to curry favor with us, I don't mind reciprocating it, to an extent." Seth was not interested in the waves his action would make after a third of the audience did, in fact, not return from the restrooms. He wanted to get home, get some sleep, and concentrate on the items for his friends and the upcoming expedition. Who was that man? To think that almost half the people we invited left at his signal, the Chancellor lamented after finishing his speech. The result was underwhelming. Most people that stayed listened, but only a few guaranteed their cooperation in finding and fighting the culprits under the banner of the Parliament. Those who had the highest chances to give them support had actually left with that mysterious man. "Congrats on meeting Seth Smith, the Tower Master of Minas Mar," Lena mentioned sarcastically. Satisfied, Lena saw Ichabod choke at the sudden revelation. The princess was not in the best mood, and it was not Seth's fault. Supporting and handing back authority to the native people of the world was a standard procedure of Krishna. The problem was that sometimes, annoying people like Ichabod Longbottom would come into power. Why did he leave? The Chancellor obviously didn't believe the restroom story. He asked Lena since she was the only one in the room that answered him. "I don't know, maybe he was displeased with your actions? Have you forgotten that it was Minas Mar that stepped in to help the people of Sigma first? I told you back then, that Delta has to take the initiative on this, but you wouldn't listen." The way Ichabod and his cronies had vehemently resisted the advice of the princess because she represented Krishna, but then immediately bend the knee when some shady church came along was not funny anymore. It was as if they made dumb decisions out of spite against her. Because they didn't listen, Krishna ended up with bound hands, only able to offer basic support to the refugees, while Delta technically abandoned them, after offering them shelter. It was a blessing that Minas Mar had stepped up to at least offer some form of hope for the people, although Lena did not overlook that they were siphoning out cheap and happy laborers, away from the district's influence. The sole reason the princess did not get involved, was because she came to trust Seth. Even if those people were at his mercy, the blacksmith didn't seem like a person who cared enough about profits to exploit people with force. Chancellor Longbottom's face darkened, being berated by the princess. There was nothing he could do. What she said made sense, even if he would never admit it. She knew that man better than he did. "What should we do now?" "Oh, now you want my advice? Fine. Keep the Church of Gatries at bay without making any definite promises. Investigate it, but don't be too eager about it. They have no influence here, and if they come here with forces of their own, Krishna also has a justification to get involved if they try anything funny." Although Longbottom didn't seem happy about having to depend on Krishna's help again, he agreed. Chapter 633. Archer's Request. Seth, unaware that he had somewhat helped Lena, returned to his workshop the next morning. Today he was going to make an item for Archer, the archer, and James, the warrior that had joined Team 3. Funny enough, Archer, the archer did not ask for a bow. Archer wanted a quiver he could wear at his hip, and not just any quiver. Would it be possible to have a quiver that generates different kinds of arrows? He had asked hesitantly with sparkling eyes. It came out, Archer was actually a big fan of superheroes like Eagly Eye and Teal Arrow that used different kinds of arrowheads to deal with situations. The problem for Seth was that he didn't have any enchantment for that. There were enchantments of various different elements and effects in his repertoire, but they only worked by being directly used on an item. None of the enchantments he knew could imbue effects on other items. He was sure this would have been child's play to Alzalsar or any other arcane enchanter on the same level as Seth, but the ones he could do always needed to be physically attached to the items they took influence on. They couldn't transfer their effects on blank items. If only things were as easy as finding the soul of an enchanter and slapping that bad boy onto the quiver. But even that wouldn't work, as there was more to enchanting than just the skills. A soul trapped in an item alone could not do it. The blacksmith had mulled over this for a while before he finally realized that he was looking at things from the wrong direction. It wasn't his fault, because of how Archer had formulated his question. A quiver that imbued ordinary arrows with effects was impossible for Seth. However, it didn't mean there wasn't a workaround. He couldn't make the quiver imbue things, but he could make the arrows absorb and mimic the power in their surroundings. Demonic enchantments were big when it came to taking things, and the forging ballad for this was not even a hard one. Seth had come across it because he had read through ballads for things other than weapons and armor at one point. Items like Jonah's hungry coin, which could store life force and mana, or Evie's armor imbued with unliving, were ballads that were used in other crafting processes. The forging ballad Seth remembered was of similar nature. It was a ballad that could imbue an item to take on the elemental powers of the materials close to it. The original use was to make laboratory containers. Containers that would mimic the properties of their contents would suffer less damage from magical reagents. Seth could use this. If he made arrows using this forging ballad, they could absorb the properties of the powers present in the quiver. With this, he only needed a way to change the elemental power of the quiver. Again, he got his inspiration from a different place. Imber's flute. He could imitate the function to imbue the sound with different elemental power. Theoretically, he could engrave several enchantments, and depending on which formation was supplied with mana, make it possible to have the power of the quiver and that of the arrows switch between enchantments. Up to now, this quiver may really be the most technical of the items Seth planned to make, aside from the golems, as there were some things to keep in mind. The forging itself was not overly complicated. The quiver was technically just a tube with a rim, made from legendary Olympian silver, and could hold up to 25 arrows. It had a grid with 25 slots that formed a little compartment at its bottom, separating arrowheads and shafts. For the forging ballad, the bard used the ballad of random curses when forging the tube and the grid. This way all arrows would come imbued with a random curse. Then he started enchanting the parts. On the quiver itself, he etched the same poem of Larich's archery that he used on his own pauldrons. On the grid, he engraved the complex formations for fire, lightning, and paralyze. It would have been cool if he could have made it in a way that Archer would end up being able to shoot arrows of fire and ice, but as the opposite of fire, the two circuits were too opposed to each other. Lightning, fire, and paralysis on the other hand worked well together, and the switch between them would be easier for the arrows. The random curse effects would not get in their way either. With the physical parts done, the next step was the soul. At first, Seth had been worried about the insertion of a soul. After all, if he inserted a soul in the grid, all enchantments would be constantly active. This was a problem because of the capacity of the absorption ballad and the number of possible enchantments. He had even planned to have the grid and quiver to be separate from each other. He would not have infused the soul into the grid part, and the user would have been able to supply mana to the desired enchantment via a small tongue that ran along the whole quiver down to the grid. But then he realized that his original thought of an enchanter's soul was not that stupid. With his current blueprint, it would be easy for any ego soul to control the enchantments of the grid. Looking at the soul, he couldn't help but smile. 2 weeks prior. Tower Master, do I really have to? I took some time out of my busy schedule and you are the one trying to back out? Come with me, if you want your multifunction quiver. The archer was suspiciously ogling the unnatural darkness of the shade territory. Seth had not expected the man to be so timid. It was already hard to have him follow into the demon district, and now he was acting up as they were about to enter the darkness of the shades. Fine, he gave in with some sweat on his forehead and followed Seth into the darkness. Soon they came to the inconspicuous door of a warehouse where Seth opened the man's eyes as they entered the shop that looked like a witch doctor's hut. It was Tano Mole's shop, still filled with all the glowing balls and colorful souls floating in them. Seth, you are back again. And you brought another guest, the goat greeted the two men. Although Archer did his best to keep his serious facade, it was pretty clear that he had a hard time dealing with the demonic environment and the talking goat. Seth couldn't help but question how someone could be like that, after spending 3 years in the apocalyptic Earth. Hello, Tano. I need an ego soul. One with magic talents would be best. Again? You already emptied my cabinet upstairs. I don't have a lot of ego souls left. You are saying that as if I don't pay for the stuff I buy. Come on, it's not for me this time. I need a soul that takes a liking to this guy, he said and pointed with his thumb at Archer, who was nervously inspecting the weird orbs. Can he use telepathy? Tano asked. Seth was stumped at the time. He had actually forgotten that one needed telepathy to communicate with souls. The blacksmith himself also didn't possess the skill originally but could use it thanks to his items. I see you didn't think of that. Don't worry, I have some cheap rings for such occasions. The goat calmed him down and threw an ugly ring at Archer, who fumbled and barely managed to catch in his surprise. Wear it and follow us. After saying that, the goat took the lead to the second floor. There were already a few new additions to the souls in the cabinet, however, they didn't go toward the cabinet. You look like a really pure-hearted fellow, unlike your boss over there. Hey! No offense. Offense taken, but continue. Well, since you seem like a good guy, I show you some of the less fortunate souls. Maybe you can find one that fits the criteria of your boss. They passed a doorway that was originally hidden by a curtain and entered a new room. Inside was a tank that was covered in demonic runes and enchantments. Inside the tank floated many souls together, like fish in an aquarium. Put your hand with the ring here and try talking to them. If you can convince one of them to come along with you, I will let you take it free of charge. Seth and Archer looked at the demon. While Archer was hesitant, Seth was suspicious to why the demon was handing out freebies. After an encouraging nod from both, the demon and his tower master, the Archer stepped to the tank and put his hand on the glass. In the ensuing silence as Archer spoke to the souls, Seth approached Mole. Be honest with me, what is this place? You didn't show it to me before. Well, you could call it a nursery. These are the souls of children and the innocent that were sacrificed in rituals. Don't look at me like this, it's not like I did this to them. I just collected them to give them a better place to exist. Unlike the ones in the cabinet outside, these people are not trapped in this state because of some lingering resentment or attachment. The lingering magic of the rituals makes it impossible for them to move on to any kind of afterlife. Even if I found a saint or a priest that could be able to purify them, they are all from different dimensions with different beliefs. Not all of them would agree to go to whatever afterlife may be connected with that god. The goat suddenly gave a long explanation, but it helped the blacksmith understand. Also, he was slightly peeved. He even understood why he didn't show these poor unfortunate souls to a man who simply wanted to turn them into potential allies or items. They had waited silently for a long time before Archer finally stepped back from the tank. It's her, he said with a blush. Why was he looking like he had just found a potential love interest on a dating app? Chapter 634. Mabel. Current. Hurry up and put me in already, the soul spurred him. Seth really didn't know why Archer chose such a feisty girl. Was that his type? The blacksmith shook his head and started hammering Archer's new girl into shape. The identity of the soul was a young woman named Mabel. She was originally a junior mage and adventurer when she happened to be caught by a demonic cultist during a quest. She was sacrificed and somehow ended up in Tanamole's hands after existing as currency for a while. Her soul was big, epic, and had an ego. Aside from her size and personality, she was a top-notch material. Even when Seth offered her an Archer to give her a body, Mabel was weirdly fixated on becoming a piece of equipment. She kept going on about wanting to see how it would feel and stuff like that, but it made Seth feel quite awkward seeing her this eager. Other than that, she was very direct, to say it nicely. Well, her nasty, her rough, her personality fit well with the enchantment he had prepared. Since Team 3 had no dedicated tanker, Seth found this the perfect opportunity to make Archer the one in control of the enemy's aggro. He intended to do so with the Apple of Discord, another enchantment sponsored by the goddess of strife, Eris. The first enchantment of Eris, Seth had used in Tekker's armor, giving him the ability of a war cry that could focus all aggro on him. The Apple of Discord in mythology was a golden apple thrown by Eris that led to a contest of beauty between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, even indirectly sparking the Trojan War. Now, be still. Once I'm done engraving this, we can proceed and finally make you an item. Saying it this way was less fun than he thought, he felt just weird. Especially, as Mabel eagerly agreed. When Seth got ready to engrave the Apple of Discord to Mabel's soul, he suddenly felt a presence behind him. It was a strong presence that gave him a polarizing feeling. Even when it was not called a blessing of, this seemed to have the same effect. Her presence made it hard to think, as not so nice thoughts about other people and people he knew in the past kept surfacing. The sigil was a simple depiction of a beautiful shining apple, but when Seth finished he found that the pattern spreading from the apple was that of cut chains and broken bonds. Kukiku, what is this power that flowing into me? Mabel asked in glee. She seemed quite happy over the power of discord pumping through her incorporeal veins. Seth hurriedly infused the soul quiver into the physical item and threw the Mabel quiver into the waters of Styy that finally drowned out the soul's manic laughter. He was just glad that he had given her neither a weapon nor a body as a vessel. It was a really good thing she was going to be Archer's problem from here on after. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Mabel, Quiver of Discord. Legendary, Ego. Durability, 9000. Capacity 25. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 Arrows of Cursed Wind. 3 Arrows of Cursed Thunder. 4 Arrows of Cursed Fire. 5 Arrows of Cursed Paralysis. 6 Arrows of Eris. 7 Mabel's Madness. 8 plus 15% casting reduction. 9 Passive skill, Larrage's Archery. A quiver with terrifying potential, if used with the right ammunition. It is the work of craftsman Smith and the first master enchanter of Earth, Master Smith. Using demonic, divine, and mysterious means to make a mad quiver. Requirement: acknowledgement of Mabel, the Quiver of Discord. Except for Mabel's Madness and the Arrows of Cursed Wind, there were no weird surprises. Seth had forgotten that the Olympian Silver had inherited the element of wind from the original Gale Silver. This explained the arrows cursed of wind. These were actually the standard arrows and their options were included in all the other options since the random curses and wind were always present in the quiver. To explain Mabel's Madness, one had to look at the arrows of cursed wind, fire, lightning, and paralysis first. All of them needed special ammunition, the arrows that would mimic the properties of their surrounding. The effects could not work on ordinary arrows, except with the help of Mabel's Madness. This effect gave a 25% chance to randomly imbue one of the effects to ordinary arrows, too. The other option like Larrage's Archery was self-explanatory. But the effect Seth had been really looking forward to were the Arrows of Eris. Like always, his thoughts and plans had actually been taken into account by the entity giving the blessing. Arrows of Eris did not need a special ammunition. Any arrows stored in the quiver would become Arrows of Eris with the ability sow discord among enemies. The aggro of the one hit by the arrow would be redirected to a single other hostile target. If there were no other hostile targets, the aggro would be without direction, meaning it would start attacking the environment. However, there was one more effect of Arrows of Eris. When arrows made of Olympian silver were stored in the quiver for at least 2-4h, they would permanently turn into Arrows of Eris. In this case, it did not matter whether they were enchanted with a forging ballad. The only requirement was the material. This meant that not just Archer, but everyone using a bow in Minas Mar could have some basic Arrows of Eris. They could be a life-saving trump card in case something unforeseen happened during an expedition or a dungeon dive. It was only a shame that the max number that could be created was 25, and one needed Mabel's approval to use the quiver for it. So, how is it to be a quiver? Seth asked a little awkwardly. It's weird, but also very interesting. Quick, give me to Archer. I want to try my power. This was a quite obvious hint, that Seth definitely did not have her approval. Later, I have more things to do. With that he threw the quiver in his inventory. The quiver was finished quicker than he expected, so Seth took a short break to recuperate, before starting on the item for James, who was also part of Team 3. James was a typical knight wearing a plate armor and wielding an arming sword in combination with a shield. He was not overly talented, nor did he have any special class as far as Seth knew. Even his classes as a knight and swordsman were quite common. With these classes, it was a shame that he didn't have a chance to further develop into the direction of a tank. In that case, he could have taken that role in Team 3. Currently, he was more of a mix between damage dealer and off-tank. There was nothing special about him, but that was okay. Seth never wanted to collect a bunch of weird and special oddballs. What was important was James' personality. It was Seth's task to make him special. Even if Archer had no way to manipulate enemy aggro, there were times when it was important to have a dedicated tank to keep the attention of the enemy. The Blacksmith was determined to turn James into a powerful tank, even if his classes were not something especially grand or rare. In the end, what did classes matter? If he wielded a legendary item or two, and maybe even managed to be chosen by a god, or just gain some blessing, that would be more than enough to rise above the masses. Nobody could stop ordinary people from becoming special. Chapter 635. Mountain and Blacksmith. This was the first step for James to become a powerful tank. Originally, Seth had wanted to use this enchantment to further improve Tekker's shield, but the hulking tank was already powerful enough as it was. He was going to make a shield for James and enchant it with the Olympian enchantment called Cerberus Guard that had been unlocked when he reached Leave 8 of Enchantment, Craftsman. Judging by the level it was unlocked and the being that lent its name to it, it had to be powerful. 5 bars of legendary Olympian silver found their way into the forge fires. This was going to be a big one, a big shield. Seth actually deliberated for a while about the shape before finally deciding to make a kite shield. This kind of shield was a jack of all trades, with usability for any situation. However, Seth couldn't leave it as just a regular kite shield. Even though it was called Guard of Cerberus, the three-headed dog was not a beast that would just block. He took some notes from a spiked pavis, strengthening and sharpening the lower tip into a wide spike that could be used for attacks. The well-practiced tune of the reflection ballad echoed through the workshop as this shield quickly took shape. In the center of the shield, Seth sculpted the three maws of the three-headed guardian of the underworld. He just thought a bear kite shield would be too simple for a legendary item. This part took the longest, as Seth found that he lacked some talent in the artistic department. Tower Master? You have a guest. Seth had mostly finished the embellishment when a sudden voice made him almost let the shield fall to the ground. In the door of his workshop stood one of Mary's assistants. Who is it? He asked after calming his heart from the scare. It's Lady Alzalsar in the company of an elderly man. Al and an old man? This didn't match her usual profile. Seth thought for a moment for what reason the sorceress would walk around with an old man. I will be there shortly. He found two figures waiting for him in one of the warmly decorated reception rooms for guests and leisure meetings. It was as he expected. Master, you have finally returned. I'm glad you still remember me, young friend. My business took a little longer than expected. I guess this means your business succeeded. Yes, everything ended satisfactorily on my friend's end. When I told him about our little business, he even insisted on delivering a personal gift from him, the old man said with a warm smile. That means. Haha, artificers are always so eager when it comes to materials. Yes, I brought the reward I promised and the gift from my friend. Seth had been looking forward to what the otherworlder would bring. Since he received the meteor iron from Master Mountain, he was sure that the voracious cloud continent was full of exotic materials. However, there was one point that confused him. But why are you with Al? It was this fairy who approached me right after I entered the city. She offered to accompany me, saying she had business with you, too. Master Mountain explained. Al. I will take my turn once the old man finished his business. For a moment, Seth thought how funny it was for some over 2 centuries old hag calling others out for their age, but hell would have frozen over before he said something like that out loud. Then I won't leave you waiting any longer. You brought out a long package wrapped in embroidered silk and 2 intricate boxes. He started by loosening the strings of the long package. Unwrapping the embroidered fabric, he revealed an indigo blue horn with a metallic sheen. The horn was incredibly straight and sharp. It looked like an almost finished sword blade but didn't seem to have ever been touched or worked on at any point in time. It gave off a cool and powerful aura. I managed to attain this item on an auction before coming here. This is the horn of a Kylan that has been naturally sharpened by glacial floods for 1,000 years. It has absorbed the power of water and ice. I'm sure you will be able to make a great item out of this. What makes you think this is the horn of a Kylan? Seth asked after staring at the item for a while. Fragment of the horned serpent, crafting material. Special. The fragment of a water deity, the horned serpent. After being separated for millennia, it has lost most of its powers. Even without powers, it holds an unnatural high affinity with water and ice. He was glad Blacksmith's eyes worked on the horn but very surprised about the information it gave him. This was once part of a deity, but why did Master Mountain think it was the horn of a Kylan? Ah, well, this was the introduction at the auction house. To be honest, I have no idea what exactly it is, but the aura it gives off is far out of the ordinary. Even if it seems weakened, you admitted with a slight blush. I see, don't worry about it, I will make good use of this, Seth said with a bright smile. Seth didn't know the rating of a Kylan's horn, but Master Mountain was probably not deceived. He might even have made a bargain and in extension Seth, too. I'm glad, let's continue. This is the core of a demonic jelly I and my friend personally hunted for you. You seemed interested in spatial treasures the last time we met. This is one of the materials that can be used to refine a spatial ring. Jellies are creatures with a body made of acid that can even melt a golden core cultivator, and they are immune to physical attacks. In the middle of the small box was a translucent pearl the size of a pinky nail. Seth didn't need the man's introduction to jellies. He already knew what they were from the description of the item he had received. Core of a demon slime, crafting material. Epic. The corpse of a special and extremely powerful mutation of slimes that mastered unique spatial skills. Shows strong affinities with poison, acid, space, and absorption. Seth's eyes glittered. Finally, he had gotten his hands on a material with spatial traits. He had not expected Master Mountain to be so caring and bring him what he wanted the most. But who would have thought that an exotic place like the voracious cloud continent also had stuff like slimes? With this, he could finally make his fourth ring, and Al was already here, too. It was like puzzle pieces falling into place. Maybe he could even finish the ring he had looked forward to for so long before night fell? And they have the weird trait of being able to swallow more than their body weight and store the excess in a separate space in their bellies. Seth only heard the last part of Yu's introduction to jellies when he finally came out of his plans and fantasies. You seem to really like this one. It's the best. Ho ho, don't judge too early. After all, I did my best to match up with the present my friend sent you. Finally, Yu brought forward the second box. Chapter 636. Soothing Lotus Seed. This is the Soothing Lotus Seed. This pill can extend the user's life by 50 years, Master Mountain revealed seriously. It was a small emerald pill, shaped like a lotus seed but looking like a crystal. Seth stared at Yu in disbelief. Was he serious? You mean to say that I am guaranteed to live 50 years longer just by eating this pill? Unless you get killed, that is correct. Why would your friend just gift away something like this, if that is true? He asked in disbelief and suspicion. I understand your thoughts. There is a catch to this pill, it can only be taken once. Swallowing more than one would be nothing but waste. My friend happens to be able to refine these, so he's never short on valuable gifts like this. Master Mountain seemed to remember something slightly troubling as he said those words. What Seth couldn't know was the stress you had gone through to try and match up to this kind of gift. Sometimes having very generous friends could put a lot of pressure on an old man who had nothing but strength. Hearing the elder's explanation, Seth stopped doubting the pill. If it was one-time use only, he could see someone giving them out like candies, if they had the resources to do so. However, the core was a much bigger present in Seth's eyes, as it was something he had direly wished for. Treasures for extending his lifespan were cool, but he was already guaranteed an extended life thanks to the system functions. The thought of long, or even eternal life was tempting. Seth would have been lying if he said it wasn't, but the blacksmith had never seriously thought about it or wished for it. Is it not to your liking? Yu asked, seeing Seth not as reverent of the pill as he would have expected. Ah, it's just 50 years of lifespan are great and all, but it isn't really helpful to me in my current situation. What is the point of a potentially long life, if I lack the strength to enjoy it? The people I like, even I can't guarantee to survive that long on Earth. I prefer these items because they offer me strength, the blacksmith spoke softly and strangely honest. Hehe, I'm looking forward to the old badger's face when I tell him that I found someone that wasn't moved by his medicine, Master Mountain couldn't help but exclaim. After a short laugh, he calmed down again and pondered. If this soothing lotus seed isn't to your liking, I could offer to exchange it with something you have more use for. Master Mountain brought a small jade bottle. In here I have 5 earth-ranked body refining pills. They are not quite as valuable as the lotus seed, but they are items with great benefits even to people without cultivation. Seth's eyes grew bright at the sigh of the otherworldly medicine. He knew that Allison had managed to develop her potion based on a recipe for something called basic body strengthening liquid. Earth-ranked body refinement pill sounded much grander, even if Seth had no idea what it actually meant. The old man implied that it was not as effective for non-cultivators, but it still sounded very powerful. As the name says, it is a pill that refines your body and expels waste and latent toxins from it. It indirectly strengthens it, by cleaning and condensing your muscles and bones. Seth had a hunch that it might be similar to his skill reinforcement that could strengthen materials by injecting magic power. It seemed more useful than the additional lifespan he may not get to enjoy. Alright, let's do that. But what do you need the seed for? Seth decided to take the deal, but it didn't mean he was not interested in why Master Mountain wanted the seed. Since he said that his friend kept gifting it a lot, he must have had one already. Yu answered with a kind old man smile. I have no plans for it. I will keep it safe for now, were his words, but his smile had a mischievous hint. You are going to rub it under your friend's nose, right? My dear friend, we only met recently, but it's as if you knew me for decades. Master Mountain smiled even brighter. A word of advice. Take the body refinement pill in an easy-to-clean room and get something tough to bite on while the pill is at work. Does it hurt a lot? Seth asked a simple question, but the silence the old man answered with went a little too long for his taste. It's not exactly comfortable. I heard it can be quite painful for ordinary people, but it is nothing life-threatening, he finally said. Well, good to know. They talked a little longer about Master Mountain's future plans. When Seth asked for how long he planned to stay in Delta this time, his answer was that he would set off right after their conversation. The old man was actually quite hurried to return home, as he had been gone for almost a full year. I guess you miss them a lot. Ah, yes. That too. But I'm more worried that they caused trouble. I don't know what I did wrong when I raised them. My children are all already old fogies themselves, yet they keep causing trouble for their old man. Although he complained, he spoke with a small smile. As Seth didn't want to keep the man from returning to his own home, they didn't talk for much longer and soon shared their farewells. You made quite the profit this time, Al commented. The sorceress had not taken part in their conversation and just mostly listened from the side. Since you was gone, it was time to find out what Alzalsar had come for. Usually, the former Lichib horde leaving her magic tower, magic apartment building. I will add to today's profit. Here. She placed a small silver ingot on the table. Ithildan, crafting material. Epic. Ithildan created by the great sorceress Alzalsar using a grand machination to utilize the power of Earth's moon. I already tested its properties. Compared to the Ithildan you get from the dwarf, it has a higher conductivity for magic but had a slight elemental imbalance. It is especially good for non-attributed magic power, water, light, and lighting. On the other hand, it is worse for all other elements and attributes, she explained while Seth was still checking the entry in his material catalog. Seth needed a moment to realize what this meant. The existence of this ingot was proof that not only Al had finished her work on the refinement of Ithildan but was most likely also done with Project Ego. That's great. This means you can help me with. Geez. I just finished a big favor for you and you already have the next thing to ask. It's the last thing for a while. I need your help with a piece of space equipment since I don't have any enchantments for it. Since Seth now had a soul with the space attribute and material with the attribute, he just needed the enchantress who could help him channel their attributes to make the item he envisioned. Fine, I owe you anyways. Chapter 637. Legion. Suddenly, James' shield had to wait as Alzalsar and Seth went to the workshop together. Since the blacksmith had already attained the master rank in goldsmith and enchantment, there was no reason to wait for the creation of the storage ring. He had been looking forward to making this item for quite some time now and all he had been lacking was a material that could act as the medium for the enchantments and the soul. With the demon jelly's core, he even got one that was originally specialized in storage. Seth used a small piece of bones of Seth for the ring and planned to set the core into the ring like he would do it with a gem. The sorceress watched as the blacksmith began his work on the ring. Even her hair stood up slightly when the eerie slow tune of the forging ballad filled the room. Dark fissures appeared in the air surrounding them, small rifts in space. The ballad praised Fokrim, a mighty demon that has specialized in matters of space and trade. The ballad cost Seth 3,000 small souls he had bought from Tanomol. In exchange for this exorbitant price, Fokrim could link a space pocket to an appropriate item. However, this was not enough to make a piece of space equipment, as it only built a connection between the two. Without the appropriate skills, one would be unable to actually use the pocket for storage. This was where Alzalsar and the soul of the 24th Ethnarch came into play. The blacksmith needed Al to make up for the shortcomings of the soul. Obviously, he couldn't keep the ego of the creature intact. Unfortunately, the soul of the creature was a lot different from what he was used to with the little experience he had. When Seth wiped the Ethnarch's ego from the soul, it retained the skills, but no agency to use them. It would take time to reform an ego that could act autonomously. That was why the control would be taken over by Alzalsar's enchantments, which would enable the user access and control over the space pocket. This was the original plan, but it gained a slight addition with Seth reaching the master level. One of the Olympian enchantments unlocked with Leave 1 was called the Basic Automaton Core Circuit. Of course, this was far from basic as it was a circuit developed by the god of blacksmiths and craftsmen himself. When Seth thought about what enchantment to add, this sprang into his eyes. If he engraved the core circuit of an automation onto a soul, would it substitute an ego, or would it be a seed for an absolutely obedient ego? He shared his ideas with the sorceress after finishing the physical vessel of the ring. Although she didn't appreciate the change in the plan, she was intrigued by the circuit itself. She agreed to work with him and see how far the automaton circuit could go. If it didn't work, they could still go through with the original plan. If it did work, she was going to change her enchantments. With bated breath she watched the blacksmith start his work on the soul of the 24th Ethnarch. Al had not seen it personally, but the aura of the soul was dark and murky. It was clear that this creature had been full of malice when alive. Seth first used soul forging to bring the soul into the shape of a ring, before he started to adapt and engrave the core circuit onto the soul ring. Some glances at the sorceress at his side calmed him, as her face was full of confusion, just like his was when he did it the first time. Just like he could only follow the system's assistance and copy the engraving onto the soul, even Alzalsar was seemingly unable to make sense of the divine enchantment. Seth was glad that he was not the only that lacked the capability to understand them. When even Al was unable to do it, there was nothing to be ashamed of with his own lack of understanding. Covering the whole ring soul in the circuit's engraving was hard and took quite a while, but finally, Seth connected the last lines and the whole circuit suddenly lit up. It was the sign that he had managed to copy it successfully. "Hehe, the last time I saw you sweating like that was at night," the sorceress joked, seeing he was done. Seth flinched, remembering the night with the sexy sorceress. He hurriedly focused on the ring soul. All that was left was infusing the soul and baptizing it in the waters of Styx. However, before he baptized it, he tried using telepathy to get in contact with the soul. He wanted to make sure it worked. Awaiting input. "Please grant a name." He didn't expect this. Was this a set-up process? He felt reminded of the times when he had to set up the operating system of new computers. But more importantly, what was he supposed to name it? It needed to be a concise name in case he had to use it to communicate with the ring. But also fitting to the ring's purpose. Legion, for it would be many in the future. It was the best he could come up with in the short term. Name accepted. Awaiting orders. Seth thought for a moment. Since it was acting like a computer program, maybe he should try using it like one? Legion, list all your functions. Affirmative. Possible functions are: mana assistance, magic power assistance, illusion magic assistance, necromancy assistance, and spatial manipulation. Can you open a gate to the space pocket connected to you? Affirmative. String winds suddenly roared through the workshop and papers flew through the air. A black, oval gate opened in the middle of the room and kept madly sucking in the surrounding air. Al waved her hand and a barrier sealed off the black gate, stopping the airflow. "It seems like your idea succeeded. Judging by the wind, it should be a big and absolutely empty pocket of space. Can the ring manipulate the size of the gate?" After some back and forth, Seth and the former Lich explored the abilities of the automaton ego and the ring's spatial powers. It could slightly manipulate the size and position of where the gate would be opened. The time to open it was almost instant. As Al herself was also not really human, she even opted to take a look at the emptiness inside. "It's about the size of my apartment building. Its base is slightly curved with an area of roughly 150 by 100 paces. There is a stable gravity and it seems a lot higher than it is wide. I suggest we build a structure inside if you want to store living units." They talked a while longer about the additional enchantments Al would add to the ring, before she got to work, too. It was Seth's turn to watch the sorceress draw a magic circle on the ground and place various materials in different places of the circle. It was honestly Seth's first time he saw an enchanter at work. She worked a lot more with catalysts than he expected. In exchange, these kinds of enchantments had a much greater range of effects than the formations the blacksmith used. She placed the ring in the middle and started chanting while walking along a specific path through the magic circle. Like during the ritual to get rid of the divine energy, the drawn lines lit up and so did the catalysts. Her chanting kept becoming louder and louder and the light kept getting brighter and the catalysts slowly melted into the formation. And then it abruptly stopped. For a moment everything was extremely bright and loud and then it was back to normal. The drawn lines and catalysts had burned away, leaving only the ring on the ground. Al picked it up and passed it to him. "Here, finish it." With a nod, the blacksmith dropped the ring into the waters of Styx. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Chapter 638. Legion, 2. Legion. Legendary, Ego. Durability, 5000. 1 Nurturing Space. 2 spells deal double damage. 3 Illusion magic effect is doubled. 4 Necromancy effect is doubled. 5 spells cost 30% less. 6 phase shift. A ring created through the cooperation of the first Master Goldsmith of Earth, Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter of Earth, Master Smith, and the great sorceress Alzalsar. It is a great accomplishment, an item that will turn the owner into the master of their own pocket dimension. Requirements: Master Smith's approval. Although the ring had a small number of effects when compared with other legendary items, but this didn't mean anything. The nurturing space was over the top. The blacksmith and the sorceress currently stood in a vast empty space and were inspecting how exactly Alzalsar's enchantments had changed. The first thing they did was walk outside. Outside the entrance of Minas Mar, Seth instructed Legion to create an entrance to the pocket space, one as big as it could. A massive portal, 10 by 20 meters wide, opened and wildly sucked in air. The winds generated even took with them large patches of snow in the surroundings. Asterion and his crowd of fans were watching the spectacle eagerly. The enchantments Alzalsar had added were mostly ones aimed at usability and safety. For starters, they helped control the size of the portal, as well as allowing an instant transmission of things inside to the outside. The automaton Eagle Legion was already able to the basics of these things, so I can't take full credit for those. I just strengthened them a little. She played her work down, as they entered the portal. Once the wind had calmed down, the space inside was filled with fresh air and snow, making it safe for a living person to enter. Inside revealed itself as a room of darkness, but not because there was no light. Piles of white snow glinted on the otherwise sickly grey ground which made up the base plane with rough edges and completely black firmament beyond. It was like standing on a small snowy island in the middle of space. I added protection against invasions from outside with space magic and concealed the space so that demons like that demon merchant you mentioned can't find it anymore. I also added an environmental light source, so we can see inside, and temperature control. Seth had not even thought of these things, but it made sense. He wouldn't want some random existence from the outer realm to stumble upon the little pocket dimension, or the demon merchant to come by and steal stuff from him. Her explanation answered some of the questions Seth had, but not the biggest one. But how did this become a nurturing space? Resting inside the nurturing space had several effects that couldn't be explained by Al's enchantments. Nurturing space: mana regeneration is 50% quicker inside the space, health regeneration is 10% quicker inside the space. Rest 4. 6h small attack up for 1h upon exiting space. 1-2h big attack up for 1h upon exiting space. 1-8h small experience bonus for 1h upon exiting space. 2-4h medium experience bonus for 1h upon exiting space. Longer times can have random benefits for the growth of stats and skills. When you ask me like that, I would guess the buffs have to do with the bones of Seth. The improved regeneration is thanks to the high mana density in the air. Alzalsar confirmed his own suspicions. This time the chaotic effects of the materials had really outdone themselves. They had actually reacted with Al's enchantments and strengthened the pocket dimension into a nurturing space. It somewhat reminded Seth of the housing system that existed in some games, where one could gain a buff by spending time or sleeping in their own house. She explained that the high mana density was because the mana of the ring's soul was feeding into the space to power the enchantments, which was also why Seth didn't suddenly have a ring that granted him several tens of thousands of additional mana. They walked around the desolate piece of earth. It wasn't like there was empty space beyond the edge, as Seth may have imagined, but the pocket dimension had a hard, smooth border he could touch. It was more like a cave than an island floating in outer space. Seth couldn't help but grin at the comparison, as Minas Mar could be translated as tower in a cave, or subterranean tower. If they really built a house here as Alzalsar suggested, it would still be on brand. Thinking of building inside this place, the blacksmith had a sudden idea. Al, how deep do you think is the earth here? Roughly half the width, so something about 40 m she estimated. Do you think it could sustain plant life? Instead of building inside the pocket dimension, Seth thought of the possibility to plant one of the house trees Karina had created. If it was as Al said and the space had a ceiling, they could simply have it grown from the bottom to the ceiling. It would save them a lot of effort. If you are thinking what I think you are thinking, then it would probably work since those trees are not normal and can sustain themselves with mana. However, it will probably slightly worsen the recovery effects. I'm sure we can find a workaround for that. Aren't there ways to increase the density? I'm sure we could create something like a mana dispenser. Seth asked, interested. With the artificial magic crystals you have, that would not be a problem, yes. When they finally left the nurturing space after their talk, the sun had already fallen. Originally, I wanted to talk to you about Project Ego and the Ithildan refinement, but I guess we should do that at another time, the sorceress said with a sigh. Seth couldn't quite point out what it was, but she seemed a little different when she said her farewells and returned to Delta alone. Seth pondered about it but decided not to dwell on it after he was unable to figure it out. Letting go of his worries, he turned to his new ring and stopped restraining the joy in his heart. With this ring, he could finally bring people like the Fae or Ceres with him, without having to hide them. He was also sure that the golem with ego, like Python and Wolfram, would appreciate to have a place to roam in. Although they couldn't quite describe how it was to be stuck in the inventory, it didn't seem like a pleasant place. He was sure Puffles and Tatzel would also appreciate the new place over the system's pet space. Especially Tatzel, who could now spend time with Python, even when they were traveling. Now, his personal equipment was almost fully completed. He only lacked a soul for the Eye of Argus. He was just happily checking his status on his way back to his quarters when his heart sank. His attributes had not increased. Looking back, there was no notification about it, when he finished the ring. What was the reason? How could this be? His great way to earn financially free stats. Did it stop? Why? After panicking over it for a moment, he came to a conclusion. There could only be one reason. A heart-rending reason. He was a master goldsmith. It was the only possibility that made sense to him. He would stop gaining attribute points for legendary items after becoming a master. It felt like the system was bullying him. At first, he tried his best to reach the master level and only got the proficiency boost after he already finished his own loadout. Now, when he is happily advancing at breakneck speed, it was telling him that his goal would also cost him one of the greatest benefits he had. Why couldn't he have been unlucky? Had the leaderboards come later, he could have earned so many attribute points with legendary items. Would it have been frustrating? Yes. Would the quality of the items have suffered? Maybe. But this was when he suddenly stopped whining because he realized something. This was not a game. He was a blacksmith. Compromising on the quality of his products for some childish min-maxing in stats was below him. These were items that were supposed to help him and his friends, his family to survive and grow. Yet, so what if he lost the chance for some more attribute points? It would have taken ages to reach his current skill level. It was good the way it happened. Chapter 639. Cerberus Shield. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between materials has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. First thing in the morning, Seth returned to finish the shield for James. All he had left to do was enchant the soul he had prepared and finish the shield. It was safe to say, it was guard dog themed. Cerberus Shield. Legendary. Physical DEF, 9000. Mag, Def, 9000. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 plus 200% power on skills and spells. 3 Guard Dog. 4 Pack Leader. 5 plus 40% damage reflection. 6 plus 50% defense when defending an entrance. 7 plus 25% defense when defending a party. 8 Passive Skill, Aura of Glaciolabelas. 9 Passive Skill, Triple Guard. 10 Active Skill, Bite Cerberus. 11 Active Skill, Dogged Stare. The ultimate shield of a loyal guard dog made by Craftsman Smith and the first Master Enchanter of Earth, Master Smith. A powerful shield to protect and support. The effects were created through the synergy of the soul of a pack leader, which Seth had managed to acquire from a dungeon boss, the enchantment guard of Cerberus, and the demonic enchantment of Glaciolabelas. Guard Dog allowed the carrier of the shield to designate a specific protection target and share their defense with them while gaining additional defense when protecting them. Pack Leader further improved defense depending on the presence of a pack or party and the size of the pack, up to doubling physical and magical defense. Passive Skill, Aura of Glaciolabelas, no cost, no cooldown. Puts party members in a trance of battle. Attack damage is increased by 25%. Attack speed is increased by 25%. Experience is lowered by 35%. Enemy aggro grows 25% quicker. This was the main effect of the Ballad of Glaciolabelas, the author of Manslaughter. The cost for the effects was a decrease in experience, which would be sacrificed to the demon, and the increase of aggro from enemies. It was a skill with advantages and disadvantages, so it was best if it was only activated when necessary. Triple Guard on the other hand may have been the best effect on the shield, it was granted by the divine enchantment. Passive skill, Triple Guard, no cost, no cooldown. Creates 2 additional shields that can be manually controlled, or will autonomously protect designated targets. Additional shields will copy any skill effects in exchange for 50% additional mana costs. Not only did the skill add 2 shields that could automatically protect the party, but they could also copy the skills used with the primary shield. For example, if James used Shield Bash, he could pay 1,5 times its mana cost and the other 2 shields would also activate Shield Bash. Depending on the skill, the user could get 3 times the effect at half the cost. Seth could only speculate about the last 2 skills. They had to be the result of the synergies. Bite of Cerberus seemed like the synergy of Glaciolabella's Cerberus and the pack leader's soul and was an accumulative skill. The wielder could load the skill by blocking 100 attacks and then unleash an attack with the accumulated damage. Lastly was the Dogged Stare, which seemed mostly based on the demoralizing enchantment Seth had used on the shield. He had gotten the idea because the dog faces he sculpted on the shield reminded him of the wyvern shield and he wanted to try and add the demoralizing effect to the shield. Together with all the other dog-themed elements, it had become the Dogged Stare. Active skill, Dogged Stare, no cost, 5 minutes cooldown. Upon activation, there is a 20 to 100% chance, depending on the target's willpower, to intimidate any target that looks at the shield for 3 minutes. It was a good crowd control skill that could potentially frighten a whole army of weaklings. Even against strong opponents, it would have a 20% chance of working. It was not overwhelmingly strong, but it had a low cooldown. Overall, Seth was happy with the shield, and to find out that he was still gaining stats with legendary Blacksmith products. This confirmed his guess, that he would not gain attributes for legendary items after he reached the master tier. He could only shrug in resignation at the thought, there was nothing he could do about it. Also, he doubted there was unlimited support, even if he didn't gain additional proficiency. It would be a little broken if craftsmen could gain 50 or 60 attribute points across the board by making legendary items. This was the equivalent of over 50 levels for an Orihuma. Seth was sure they would be a cut-off even if one didn't reach the master tier as quickly. Separating from these thoughts, Seth turned to the next item on the list. It was the weapon Azul, the former leader of Chimeras asked for. The four-armed lighting witch had taken a liking to Seth's giant's rod and asked for something similar. The Chimera wanted a spear that dabbled as staff and could be used to cast magic. With a material like the legendary Olympian silver and its exceptional properties, this order was no problem at all. 5 bars of silver found their way into the forge. Seth decided to make Azul's staff/spear from a solid piece of Olympian silver and add a few pieces of charged aquamarine into the tip and along the shaft. Charged aquamarine was a special type of gemstone that was loaded with the power of lightning. They were an epic material for magician staffs. Seth had looted a few of them from the treasury of the Theocracy's stronghold. With his practice in forging, setting the 6 stones he chose for the weapon, took longer than the forging of the item itself. Since Azul was a pure lightning mage, it made no sense to focus on anything but improving her lightning damage. This was why the forging ballad this time was dedicated to Furfur, a demon of tempest and lightning storms. Taking into account the silver natural affinity with wind, this seemed like an obvious choice. The ballad itself would add Furfur's cursed lightning to every attack. This meant, whether it was magic or a physical strike, the attack would leave cursed wounds that needed high-grade recovery magic to purify. The enchantments he engraved on the other hand had nothing to do with Azul's elemental damage but concentrated on the spear's duality as a staff and a spear. The blacksmith engraved the complex circuits for mana storage, magic power efficiency, piercing, and sharpness. On one hand, he used to thoroughly connect the charged aquamarine with the spear and enhance its abilities as a magician's staff. On the other, the enchantments improved its power as a spear. Seth abstained from using a demonic poem on purpose since they were not the best in a matter of predictability, which was important when it came to a staff. With the spear, forged, the stones set and the enchantments bringing everything together, the blacksmith started on the soul of the weapon. Although Seth would have wanted something like the soul of a storm elemental, he would have felt bad because of Ceres. It was because he felt bad, not because Tunomol didn't have any. Although it was true that he didn't have any. The soul he finally got from the goat was the soul of a monster called an acolyte of storms. Mole described it as a monster born from a tree struck by lightning and living in mountainous regions. The burned twig figure would have a roughly humanoid shape that naturally learned wind and lightning magic and grew stronger with age. They were a terror for travelers in the mountains as they would hunt people for food or out of curiosity. The danger was their almost human-like shape. Before their victims could make out what they truly were, it would already be too late. Finding a soul that so perfectly fit the item he planned, made Seth appreciate the shop more and more. Being able to choose from a wide selection was really an improvement from before when he had to deal with the souls he had on hand. After shaping the epic big soul into the shape of the spear, Seth turned to give it its divine enchantment. Chapter 640. Palpitating. Once the soul spear was shaped, Seth engraved a simple sigil onto it. It showed a cauldron that was struck by lightning. This was the sigil of the destiny of Salmoneus. He was a king that dared to impersonate Zeus by throwing torches to imitate lightning and driving a chariot pulling kettles behind it to imitate thunder. For his blasphemous behavior, the king was struck down by Zeus with lightning. This was Salmoneus' destiny. The blacksmith was very sure the enchantment would grant a kind of lighting power. When he finished the sigil, a pattern made up of a mix of lightning and pieces like broken kettles covered the soul armament. With practiced moves, he put the spear into the waters of Styx and soon heard the familiar ding. Ding! You have finished a legendary item. +1 to all attributes. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. The spear suddenly lit up and the lights of electric arches kept playing around the tip. Some were a bright white, while others seemed more like lightning-shaped shadows. Seth guessed the latter was the cursed lightning while the former could be the effects of the divine enchantment. They spilled from the charged aquamarines of which 3 had taken a darker tone, while the other had become lighter in color. Palpitating Spear. Legendary. Physical damage, 2700. Mag damage, 2300. Durability, 9000. 1 Blessing of Wind. 2 + 300% power on skills and spells. 3 + 200% power to lightning spells. 4 + 200% power to wind spells. 5 Demonic lightning. 6 + 150% piercing damage. 7 + 40% mana regeneration. 8 15% item breaking. 9 active skill, Furfur's Discharge. 10 active skill, Lightning Storm. An electrifying spear created by the craftsman Smith using legendary materials and enchanted by the first master enchanter of Earth, Master Smith, using demonic, divine, and mysterious means. A charged item, not just any lightning mage would be able to handle. At first glance, the spear sounded awesome. At second glance Seth started sweating. What had gone wrong with this one? The effects were all quite normal. The Olympian enchantment had imbued the power of item breaking, which caused 15% of the attack damage directly to the item. Demonic lightning gave all lightning spells the additional curse attribute and allowed her to directly channel her mana through the spear to generate lightning bolts. Without prior chance or a cooldown. What made him sweat were the descriptions of the skills and their accompanying chants. Active skill, Furfur's Discharge, no cost, 30 minutes cooldown. Chant, experience the full power of the dark side. Target will be wrapped in cursed lightning for 1 minute with an 80% chance to be paralyzed. Lightning will cause 20% of base magic damage every second. Active skill, Lightning Storm, no cost, 30 minutes cooldown. Chant, let the heavens rage. Summons a lightning cloud over the target area. Punishing lightning will randomly strike enemy units in the area of effect with 50% of magic damage with a 50% chance to paralyze enemies. One was a powerful single target skill, the other was an AoE, and both came with some weird chants that seemed weirdly familiar to him. He just hoped Azul wouldn't feel the urge to scream something along the lines of unlimited power, while she roasted someone. Satisfied, he put the spear aside and turned to the next item on the schedule. Seth's blacksmith skill was now roughly 20% away from the master tier, he could already smell it. Motivated, the blacksmith turned to a comfort product for the next one. For Edward, Evie's brother, he wanted to make a sword. Edward was usually glued to Evie's side, yet he had still not opened up to her. Maybe there had really gone something wrong when he fixed his soul? Since there was a big brother that wanted to protect his sister, what would fit better than to give him a mighty sword to look cool with? With practiced and relaxed moves, the blacksmith forged a long sword in record time. The ballad he used was a new one. Although he was a great sympathizer with Zaphon, the burning skies, the one he used was dedicated to Nergal, a demonic deity of fire and war. The reason was that the forging ballad would not just offer fire damage, but also add a bonus to sword mastery. The best part was that this was paid by simply using the sword. The blood of an enemy would be absorbed and work as a sacrifice to Nurgle. Seth had become so practiced in forging swords, that he barely needed any grinding to refine their shape. It was mostly to sharpen the edge and for a cleaner look. When it came to enchantments, Seth did not even bother to try and find a demonic enchantment or come up with one. He originally wanted to go all in with the complex elemental enchantment, because their power was greatly influenced by his own affinity with fire. After many tries, he even managed to generate a new enchantment called Fire Edge. It was technically the same effect as when Seth used his energy manipulation and combined it with his pyrokinesis to create a blade covered in fire. This new enchantment could improve the sharpness of a blade by concentrating the heat on the edge. The only drawback was that it did not generate its own fire, but needed other enchantments to supply it. If he wanted to use it, he would need to also engrave other fire enchantments to power it. Unfortunately, these plans were doomed to fail. Usually, these enchantments would have been no problem, but with a soul constantly powering them, a constantly flaming sword was just annoying. Like with the quiver, this needed an ego soul to be controlled. Now, he had visited Tunnamole together with Edward, but for some reason, he was really unpopular with the souls inside the goat's nursery. The blacksmith had prepared to take another road until he became a master enchanter. His new title had opened new doors. Seth was up to some heresy as he inserted the divine automaton core circuit, together with the fire edge and the fire circuits into the formation combination. He didn't know whether it would work at all, but he was ready to exhaust his mana to try. This was the only way. He couldn't get his hands on an ego soul, and there was no way for two divine enchantments to coexist on the same soul. If he managed to combine the automaton core with the fire enchantments, he could have the controlling ego on the item, while the soul became the powerhouse of the sword. It was a step he had avoided until now. On one side he really didn't have a lot of time, on the other he was really afraid it would explode in his face. Seth couldn't help but doubt that gods liked people messing with their work. But Hephaestus was the god of craftsmen, he wouldn't get angry with a junior trying to modify his work, right? Right? He clicked the button to combine and squinted his eyes, prepared to be struck down. The first attempt obviously failed, but he also survived. Becoming slightly more confident that the god of blacksmiths was not going to descend and punish him, he started seriously spamming the combination button. His mana waned away quicker than in a battle, as the mashed the combine button, without any results so far. After the 100th try, he became desperate and started with weird rituals, like kissing the lucky trinket 3 times before pressing the combination button. Trying for a working formation combination painfully reminded him of drawing gotchas. "Finn, are you in Minasmar today?" In the end, he even went as far as to call Finn. "I playing with Mina, do you need something from Finn? Could you come to my workshop? I need a lucky charm." At first, the fairy's big black eyes looked at him from the communication orb with a little confusion. But then they widened as she seemed to understand what she wanted. "You want to abuse Finn's luck?" "I'm sorry, Finn. But it's really import." She was right, Seth was after the luck bonus that was granted by being in a party with a fair folk. But when he was about to apologize, she continued. "That will cost you," she said with a cheeky smile. "Finn also wants to go watch a movie with Seth, and we will get ice cream without the grumpy caterpillar." "You are driving a hard bargain, but I accept your proposal," Seth said happily, seeing Finn wasn't offended. Whether it was his own luck or the fairy's presence, the moment Finn was floating beside him, the combination succeeded immediately. "We are already done?" she asked, confused when he shared the good news. "I mean, you can stay and watch if you want to. I will start engraving now." "Finn will." Finn hasn't watched Seth work in a long time.